first. We'll go over here. This is all gone all the way back. Still standing water. This was my grandma's house. Not really anymore. Go to the backyard.
You know what I did with my little flashlight?
We set up all of this to get to higher ground, but obviously, thank God we didn't have to do that. So this is our back porch right now. I'm gonna come out here and show you the backyard. Somebody's RV came in our backyard. That's our pool. That's our deck. That was my house. My house is gone.
Oh, you just feel for anyone that saw that. One of the most shocking images I saw was a second floor lanai in Fort Myers Beach, so 20 feet of water, just to show you that how high that is. There's also a news station right now in Fort Myers. They've just been evacuated, so imagine that they're sleeping there all night. They're covering this, worried about their home as well. Now they're getting evacuated from their station.
What's so, I think, sad, right, about this situation is that we do expect to see more damage like what we saw right there. And that was her grandmother's house. Her grandmother, likely an elderly woman who now has to, you know, find another place to live. I'm sure her loving family is going to take her in, but the devastation and the memories, right, that you lose when you're in a situation like that is very hard, if impossible, to replace.
They've got a 2-day curfew in effect, but obviously this is kind of ground zero. Obviously there are other spots that are going to have major damage, but they got a big hit now. Let's check in with the Weather Center right now. They are tracking. Obviously, this is Fort Myers, Jamie, kind of the worst we've seen in that area where most of this where it came on ground.
Oh, of course. Yeah, that was that point of impact, Ryan. But Ryan, don't forget, you know, these impacts spread far and wide. I mean, we've got issues here in Central Florida now with sharp water rises. We've got some flash flooding going on right now. That video, Allison, chilling, to say the least.
Absolutely chilling. I still have the chills from that.
Incredible.
And we're going to continue to monitor conditions here locally for you. Our reporters are out on the ground showing you what it looks like outside, but a lot of rain and some wind gusts really going to be picking up over the next few hours. A live look at our camera from the Fox 35 Storm Team Thunder Truck. Our crew is driving now. You can see all of that rain that's coming, the dark clouds ahead, and it is definitely windy out there. So we'll be continuing to monitor conditions there locally, as well as what we're seeing on our Fox 35 Storm Tracker radar. And Jamie, rain is falling at a rate of 4 to 7 inches per hour.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to talk about it right now. I mean, the rainfall has been absolutely insane. Let's go ahead and blast on off here to the main weather wall. Good morning. Just shy here, 3 a.m. on this Thursday for you. And we continue our live tracking efforts of Ian. Now, I want to give you a look here at our rain rate within our Fox 35 Storm Tracker radar. We've got, again, quite a bit of rain falling across the region. Right now, it's all about the flash flood potential around these parts. So as we show you now around Altamont Springs, Daytona, Titusville. Allie, will you drive this for me here? The touchscreen here is a little locked up. It's been heavily used. Valuable tool in depicting these rain amounts, so I want to focus in on these purple shaded areas. We're talking at about at least 4 inches per hour being dispatched from the bottom of this big canopy here. Real wet weather. There's Oak Hill, South Volusia County, in the northern Brevard. That's a big conveyor belt. This is actually the decaying eye wall of Ian right now, and this is turning into what we call an annular hurricane, meaning that it will stay a hurricane while it crosses the entire peninsula. It could diminish to tropical storm strength just before it begins to kick out in the Atlantic later today, as in the evening hours. But you can see the legacy of this particular storm here for us here in Central Florida. This hurricane is putting down a lot of rainfall, and we've got all kinds of flood warnings right now. So that's the deal. Allison, take me up into Volusia. Give me a little round robin here. Let's take the folks here in the tornado radar and let them know what's going on. I want to also take a look here at Volusia County, where Nestor Mato is located over New Smyrna Beach. He's reporting Canal Street living up to its name now. It is looking like a canal as water rises there. And we've had some inquiries, Allison, from the villages as you get to North Sumter and southern Marion County. So I do want to head on out that way and let you know what y'all have out that way. And it looks like easing rain still coming down And rainfall amounts there have certainly decreased, but nonetheless, we continue with some impactful conditions there. Very gusty winds there in North Sumter County right now. Watches and warnings for you. The hurricane warned area shaded here in red. The tropical storm warnings in orange. And our watch product here showing the Gainesville area, Alachua over to Gilchrist County. Parts of our Fox 51 WOGX viewership, our sister station up in North Central Florida. They're under watch right now for tropical storm conditions. So there's the circulation. That's Ian. Watch now as it tries to get offshore here as we go a little deeper into the day, kind of hanging around. There may be a burst or two of heavier rain as we go into the afternoon hours by this evening, moving steadily on out into the Atlantic, and that's part of the forecast track cone now that takes that up to the Carolinas longer term as we get into the weekend. Our future rain, as we have accumulated a lot up to this point, so I want to start at this point and take you into tomorrow at 8 a.m. An additional foot of rain possible at Palm Coast down to Daytona Beach. Pearson will see another 8 inches of rain as well as DeLand, and then we'll peel it on back to 0 out closer to Tampa, drying out there for the long haul. And a look at our current wind speeds and gusts. We have the current wind speed here, sustained in white, the gusts showing up in blue. And you can see, Allison, that we've got gusts here around 46 at Sanford, 41 Orlando, 45 Kissimmee. So we are nowhere out of the woods just yet. Here on our rooftops here in Seminole County at the Fox 35 studios. It is raining hard out, and it is very, very windy at this time.
Yeah, and I feel like when we talk about gusts, you can hear from all of our reporters, oh, we just got a gust that moved me back a little bit. And that's what we could be seeing. So those sustained winds and then a few of those gusts really picking on up, and like Jamie said, you will likely be able to hear that outside of your house. But I do want to take you into our Fox 35 storm tracker radar and let you know that the flash flood warning in Orange County has been extended now till 4:45, and we're seeing it until about 4 o'clock in the morning in Volusia, as all of that heavy rain is not only making its way across the Florida Peninsula right now, but you can see some of those outer rain bands back off into the Atlantic. But I do want to take you into street level as we zoom in a little bit closer toward the Orlando Metro, through Orlando, Pine Hills. Now, if you do live in Pine Hills on Mercy Drive, Mission Road, State Highway 438 here, Fairville, and you can see up toward Lockhart. Now, some of those areas that I mentioned, we're just looking at moderate rain about 15 minutes ago, but you can see that the heavy rain is slowly going to be pushing off to the west there. And if we take you into northern Brevard County near Mims up toward Oak Hill, even New Smyrna Beach, you can see that heavy rain is going to be shaded in red on your screen, is falling, like we mentioned, at a rate of 4+ inches per hour. So a lot more rain is expected. But if we actually take you into some winds, where we're seeing the strongest winds right now going to be in Osceola as well as East Orange County, about 34 to 39 mile per hour winds there, about 43 just to the south of the beach line. And if you live in Port St. John, between Port St. John as well as Titusville, about 48 mile per hour winds. So we continue to monitor this for you, likely going to be seeing a lot of this rain continuing, Jamie, over the next several hours throughout really the day today. And those gusts, as that outer eye wall is slowly making its way up to the north, that's when you really could be seeing some strong gusts in your neighborhood.
All right, excellent analysis, Allison. And of course, we want everyone to stay in your safe place, in your sturdy shelter. We're riding this out with you. Again, it's loud here at the studio, so we're experiencing, I know a lot of you are as well, so everyone stay nice and calm. We'll continue to guide you through this as Ian romps right on through Central Florida, bringing wind and rain impacts at this very time. I want you to stay here, trust us, depend on us here in the Fox 35 Storm Center. We'll send it back to you now.
All right, Central Florida now in the thick of it as Hurricane Ian is slowly moving across the state of Florida. We're going to take a short break here. We'll have more after this.
Regional Dispatch with Manatees, Coast Guard Sector St. Pete. Are you responding to that vessel or going to that vessel? Roger, do you know of any relief to get to that vessel at all? regional dispatch with Manatee. We have the position. We are going to put out a broadcast for it. Negative. We are not responding as of right now. We are going to put a broadcast for it to let anyone in the area know.
And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. Thanks so much for joining us as we continue to follow the latest on Hurricane Ian as it continues to slowly move across central Florida. I'm Shirley DeScorbath. Let's take a look at our X-ray system. Now you can see here, it is currently in central Florida, and it is about 55 miles away from the city of Orlando. We want to go ahead and take you to live coverage from our station, our sister station, Fox 35 in Orlando.
Strip mall sign down. You can see the wind bending palm trees in the background. And those are just areas they will continue to find damage, unfortunately, throughout today. People in Daytona Beach, they're now experiencing that heavy rain and the gusty winds there. You can see where the storm is right now.
Yeah, Fox 35's Deborah Cho, she's in Daytona Beach. She has a closer look.
Well, the winds are starting to pick up here in Daytona Beach. I'm actually currently right in front of the Hard Rock Hotel. So we're standing right next to that building, which is giving us a little bit of that barrier from all those winds. And earlier this morning even, some of the wind gusts that were reported were over 80 miles per hour. So it just goes to show how strong Hurricane Ian actually is right now. I want you to take a look behind me. You can just see how strong those winds are. You can see the palm trees behind me are moving. And if I was past this Hard Rock Hotel without a barrier, guaranteed you can just see how strong that wind gust is. We were actually over not too far away, probably about 5 minutes away on Oak Ridge Boulevard in Halifax. And that area, there was a power line down. So we are seeing some power lines down in the area. We are seeing some power companies in the area just on standby. And once things start to become safe, they will start to restore some of that power. I actually just spoke with some people that were from Buffalo, New York, that were here on standby to go ahead and help once it is safe to do so after Hurricane Ian passes. I also want to note that Volusia County is under a curfew until the morning hours, until 7 o'clock in the morning, all because of safety. And I haven't seen very many people out on the roads this morning, which is a good sign. People are hunkering down and staying indoors. So of course, safety is at the top of mind, and people are ready to stand by as soon as Hurricane Ian does pass in the Daytona Beach area. Reporting in Daytona Beach, Deborah Cho, Fox 35 News.
Deborah, thanks. By the way, we've got new video out of Fort Myers there again showing coastal homes that are just underwater. It's so hard to see some of the damage taken as Hurricane Ian was hitting hardest yesterday afternoon. It's from a view up high. You can see the storm surge that has risen all the way past the roofs of some homes. I mean, you're talking 20, 30 feet by the time it got to the top of the roof. You can't even tell where the coast begins and ends at some spot in the video. Fox 35 News planning to send a couple crews to the area today, showing the impact of the damage that is expected to just be catastrophic there.
Yeah, it is just going to be unfortunate to see what the daylight brings there. So let's go ahead now and take a live look at the conditions throughout Central Florida right now. Once again, we do want to go ahead and give you a listen to Lake Monroe. But before we do that, we want to go ahead and let you know as you take a look, not a listen, at what is happening outside. That's the radar, right? And as you can see, just rain is filling that entire area. We are hearing the rain on our rooftops right now here at Fox 35. But the interesting part of this are the cameras, right, that you see on the right. These are the cameras, as we always say, that we show you in the morning when we are going to bumps and breaks and it's daylight, right? We can say it's shaping up to be a gorgeous day. That is not the case right now. As you take a look at our top camera, you can see, Ryan, the wind is just kind of, you can see the rain, right, whipping across the camera there. And then our middle camera, which is our camera from the Hyatt, you can see that camera is upside down, and you can see the camera underneath that is also got a lot of wind and rain as well. But let's go ahead now and take a listen to Lake Monroe.
Those are just kind of some of the sounds we have heard throughout the night, and you've heard them as well. That's our live camera, Lake Monroe and Sanford. You heard how strong some of the winds are there, and we've been checking in with Amanda, seeing how strong the winds are there. The last time we checked in with her, they were extremely strong. She's in a restaurant that was damaged by Ian. Amanda, are things any better there now?
Oh, the winds feel like they've just gotten a lot stronger all of a sudden. You can really feel the power of that wind and rain. And we were even just saying how looking at this mangled awning that used to be in front of the St. John's River Steak and Seafood restaurant, it doesn't seem like it's going to stay here much longer given the strength of these winds. You can see how it's been ripped apart. Parts of it are in the road. The only thing holding it upright right now is because there are plants and a palm tree behind it. But given the strength of these winds, it could certainly go airborne. So people need to practice caution whenever they are out. I don't recommend it. We're keeping a safe distance away and watching as things change out here. But it is certainly still very strong with the winds. We're just feet away from Lake Monroe. We can see the waves crashing. And when you look towards the light, looking up in the sky, you can just see how strong that wind and rain is right here. So this is by far the most significant damage we have found so far here in Sanford. So we'll send it back to you in the studio.
You know, Amanda, you mentioned that the wind and the rains are picking up there. Are you seeing kind of those lulls where you'll have a period where you may not have as much, and then all of a sudden, almost without warning, you see it pick up like what you're seeing there?
I would describe the wind as strong and really strong.
And that sums it up. Strong and really strong. And we certainly can see it is really strong where you are right now. Amanda McKenzie, thank you so much for that.
Yeah,
you know
obviously Central Florida feeling the strong, but at least on the radar you see that South Florida is not. At least it's moving out of their area, which is good for now, though I'm sure some of the bands are still hitting them. But we are seeing heavy rainfall from Hurricane Ian as it comes closer really to our area.
So we've got our eyes in Volusia County right now and near the Atlantic coast, and that's where we find Fox 45's Nestor Mato. He's live in New Smyrna Beach for us right now. Nestor, good morning to you. What are you seeing right now?
Well, so far what we're seeing is those squally weathers. They come and they go, right? The wind picks up, the gust picks up. I was listening to Jamie King. He said here in New Smyrna Beach, we have gusts of up to 74 miles per hour at times. But there are lulls, and that's because it's not yet here, right? Later this morning, we're expecting the worst of it. But I wanted to point out some of the tree branches that are already down. And that's that we're still just waiting for the worst of it. We're still 12 hours to go at least here, and we're seeing already things starting to come down, so it's a precursor of what's coming. The biggest concern though in Volusia County is the rain. We're seeing everyone go ahead and put sandbags to keep from flooding. In fact, Volusia County deputies say that they have high water rescue teams deployed. They're actually in standby. They're not home, you know, writing it out. They're out at their stations, riding out the storm away from their families. They wish they could be there just like we do, and they're ready to go if anyone needs help to those areas that may be flooded out where a regular vehicle cannot pass. So high water rescue teams ready to go. As you can see, there's power. Volusia County, for the most part, has power. In fact, we were in contact with the county, and as of 10 p.m., which was the last check that they gave us, there was only 20,000 people without power here in Volusia County. So we're still waiting for the worst of it, but we're definitely feeling the impacts and nonstop rain. I can tell you that as well.
Nestor, I'm sure all the business owners there, obviously, they want to keep power. They want to not have damage. It's kind of hard to see because it's how dark it is. The water that's there now, obviously, that's the biggest concern. What do you see? Where's that water coming from?
Yeah, so the water is really, there are the beach access, so everything's really coming from the beach side. I can tell you that the causeways are shut down until further notice. The bridges shut down until further notice. Curfew till 7 a.m. this morning. And again, tomorrow, there's going to be a curfew 8 p.m. to 7 as well.
You know, it's very quickly before I let you go. One of the things I'm always fascinated by, and I don't know if you have seen this where you are, but you know, Ron, we've covered so many of these hurricanes, Nestor. We tell people, listen, stay inside. You know, we go out because we do that as a community service. This is what we signed up to do, right? When you're out and about, are you always surprised when you see folks who are out and about either playing on the water or walking, you know, through water that they can't see what's underneath and that kind of thing? And if so, have you seen any of that?
You know, I think what it is, it's that it's 2 a.m. And so people are probably at home how they would be on a normal day. But I gotta tell you, that is one of the things I did notice. I'm like, you know what? No one's out here. No one's out here. I don't know if people are really taking this curfew very seriously. They're taking this storm very seriously. But I've been out since midnight, haven't seen not a car, except for emergency vehicles that will pass by every once in a while. You'll see a deputy. Other than that, everyone's heeding the warnings. Again, we're waiting for the worst to come after sunrise, and then I'll tell you how it's looking then.
That's exactly what the chief of police wants to hear right now.
And that's what they want to hear. He
out
gave
there.
the perfect answer. You certainly don't want to be out
We're
there.
sorry you're by yourself, but it's a good thing you're by yourself. So
Well, he's with his photographer. He's our little company.
We'll check back in a little bit.
Thank you.
All right, let's go over to Osceola now. The city of Kissimmee is halting emergency response crews, saying its winds have made it really just unsafe for responders. We talked about this is going to happen a lot. There is no definite time frame when they'll return, of course, likely when the winds die down. The city saying residents should still call 911 during an emergency, saying crews will respond, but with that notion as soon as possible, as soon as it's safe for them.
Well, right now we do want to switch our attention now to Fox 35's Dave Puglisi, because Dave is in Polk County. That is near Lakeland. Dave, good morning to you once again. What are you seeing where you are?
Well, Danielle, we've made some pretty decent ground. We're on South Orange Avenue, approaching downtown Orlando, right now passing Orlando Health, where we've been driving for the last half hour through the eye wall of this storm, Hurricane Ian. It's been very difficult to drive. We actually got off the highway because it was really starting to blow us around. So I'll give you a look at the roads in front of us. It may be a little bit difficult to see from here, but the water is pooling on the streets to the points where the wind is blowing it. It looks like waves coming at you on the road. And we just came through the intersection just a few blocks down where it was flooded. So we are starting to see some flooded streets through the downtown area. But yeah, the highway would be starting to become so strong. The winds were blowing us around so much that as we started to get to I-4 towards downtown, where it's at a higher elevation, we decided to get off and get on these side streets because just the dangers and the risks are not worth it when we could drive on this. Now, granted, as you can see around us as well, there aren't many people around. Oh, there's some flooding, a pretty decent amount of it off to our right. Oh, and we just found it. So this is intersection here is pretty flooded. We're driving through it. Oh, it's on the front of the hood of the car here. Here, I'll get you. There's a nice view. Yeah, it was splashing over the hood like the log rides at Disney World there, which we did drive past Disney World. It was not looking like the happiest place on earth at the time, because that was when we were going through the thick of the eye wall. But yeah, here we're coming up on downtown. But yeah, that's the latest here in Orlando. We'll have more throughout the morning as we get closer to downtown and some of the flooding and the damage we may see down here. No one's on the roads, no people except for a couple emergency vehicles off in the distance.
Dave, what a great view there of the water. And the Thunder truck, by the way, is built to drive in these conditions. So, Dave, I know you got one of the last hotel rooms. What do you describe as people trying to get out of the storms last night? You also talked about seeing some power poles, I believe, that had gone down. So you've seen a lot of that damage.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of it, and while I speak about that, I'll show you some of the damage here. You can start to see some debris here in the streets, and I'll just keep this view up for you. But yes, down in Polk County in the Lakeland area, the winds were so strong last night that when people, the hotels, we got one of the last rooms of the hotels in that area. I called 7 different places, found the last one. Oh, that was a broken street lamp back there. And people who I talked to said they started to see the videos coming out of Fort Myers and decided to pack up and get somewhere safe. It's been an incredible storm, and I think people started to see as soon as this storm landed just how serious it really was and how serious we've been saying it's going to be for a while. And they finally decided to get to higher ground, and that was a smart thing to do for sure.
Very quickly, Dave, before we let you go, we saw you splash through that kind of massive puddle, right? That pooling water there. One of the things we want to make sure that folks understand is that you can't see it right before you come up on it. And so it could be very, very deep. And so in terms of staying away from that, I think that's a very important thing to do, especially until the sun rises and we kind of can assess the situation. Dave Puglisi reporting live. Dave, we appreciate you. We'll check back in just a few minutes. Thanks again. We now want to shift our attention now, Ryan, to Lake County.
That's where Randy Hildreth is. She is in Mount Dora right now, and it looks like, Randy, you're out there on the roadways, and it looks like some emergency crews out there as well. What are you seeing?
Yeah, good morning to you all. In terms of what we're seeing here, we just got a huge gust of wind
All right, so we'll get back to her coming up here in just a bit. As you can tell, this is a very fluid situation, and so we'll get back to Randy in just a moment. But first, let's go ahead and give you a look now. All right, so folks, this is I-4. This is mile marker 94. It's in Longwood. A lot of you have probably gone up and down this roadway many, many times. Right now, you cannot. That is because all westbound lanes, Ryan, right now are blocked. There's some kind of emergency activity, maybe some flooding.
I can tell you, when I went home last night, I took the back roads. I mean, you can certainly always take I-4. There's not going to be as much traffic now. It's not the time to do it right now. But we don't know if this is a crash or why they're blocking that off. But that is looking right there at exit 94. We'll continue to watch that. But they don't want cars out right now. We've talked about that. Dave's showing us why that is for sure.
Right, absolutely. So we'll stay on top of that situation. And as soon as we know what that is, we will bring it to you. But, you know, you talk about like, all of us try to get in and out of work because we have to. But folks do not have to leave their homes. Even
most places are closed today.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Everything is closed. And you talk about your Central Florida leaders, right? They're hunkering down as well, riding out the storm.
That is a crash with injuries, by the way, on I-4, which is just kind of another reason
why you shouldn't be on the roadway.
We have seen some fatal crashes last night as well, so just another reason not to be on the road. Let's check in with Connor Hansen. He's in Orange County, where leaders are staying safe this morning.
I'm standing right outside the Emergency Operations Center for Orange County. We're here in Winter Park. You can actually see how they have these huge black curtains over the entrance. That's to keep everyone safe inside. This is where county officials like the mayor and other leaders are staying the night and staying throughout the storm. We had the chance to talk to Chief Avery, who's in charge of emergency management for the county. Her biggest concern is flash flooding at the moment. We've had warnings in the area, but she says they're ready with water rescue teams. They're worried the early morning hours could be the worst of this storm, and we're seeing bands and waves of rain and wind continue to get stronger here. Her reminder to everybody is to stay home. Even if you're experiencing some of that flooding, stay home. It could be more dangerous on the road. It's also been treacherous for first responders. When it gets windy enough, you can imagine driving a fire truck is tough, so that could affect response times. Even more reason for people to stay home. We asked them a little bit about what goes on inside this command post during the storm. They basically got a bunch of people in here monitoring things. They're watching camera feeds from around the county, busy intersections, radio traffic, taking calls, just keeping track of everything. And again, this is where county leaders will be. This is where they'll be providing any major updates. We're expecting a press conference from the mayor sometime this morning. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that. Ian, not sparing any part of Central Florida. This video was shared by a viewer in Altamont Springs in Seminole County. He captured the heavy rain pouring down near Cranes Roost Park. Lightning flashes as well in the background, as you can probably make out there. There is not a single vehicle trying to navigate the storm in this video you are looking at here, and that is what we want to see.
They want to see for sure. 3:14. Let's get an update on the storm right now. Allison and Jamie.
All right, so Fox 35 News bringing us the most up-to-date information on the ground in Orlando, in Central Florida, and we are so thankful to them. Meantime, we want to take a look at the radar. As you can see, the slow-moving storm continues to move through Central Florida at a slow rate of speed. Now, on Wednesday, we heard from Governor Ron DeSantis. He said that crews are on standby. About 7,000 National Guardsmen and 300 aircrafts are prepared to help. Now, this comes after more than 2 million people throughout the state of Florida are without power. Now, again, obviously, this is because of hurricane force winds and gusts, and obviously because of that storm surge that we saw on southwest parts of Florida. Now, on Wednesday, Hurricane Ian started as a Category 4 storm, but we know now that it has downgraded to a Category 1 storm. And again, in Central Florida right now, they are in the thick of it. Although it has weakened to a Category 1 storm, it still is a dangerous situation. And again, if you are in that area, you should not go outside. You need to hunker down and stay indoors. Now, it will be interesting once Hurricane Ian moves through and passes through the area. Once the sun comes up, what damage will be left behind. Now, we have seen damage in Fort Myers, in Naples, and now we are starting to see some of the damage in Tampa. And for that, we want to go and take you live to our sister station, Fox 13 in Tampa.
Cayo Costa, just north of Sanibel Island, bringing a maximum sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. Dave, we were talking, obviously you'll have to wait for all the data and all this stuff to come in, but you think it might be a Cat 5.
You know, this is what happened with Andrew. When they reassessed it and they went back to the radar images and this and that, and then they realized, oh, this was a little bit stronger. Even there were times when the plane was flying around and they found 180 mile per hour winds, maybe a few thousand feet up.
Wow.
Okay, that's a few thousand feet up, but sometimes some of that can drop to the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. So it wouldn't surprise me. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if they upgraded it, because a Category 5 is 157 mile per hour winds. It was 155, so it's not that it has to go a long way to get there. Yeah. But it doesn't make a difference between 155 and 160. It really doesn't. The large size of this storm was the reason you had that 16-foot storm surge into the Fort Myers area. Now, if you're just waking up and you're just joining us and you've got, oh, by the way, I got to break for a second. Your mom does have power.
Oh,
okay, so
Mama
you're good.
Epstein,
Mama Epstein's got power. So I wanted you to know that.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I know where she lives, which is Mama Epstein. I'm coming over.
You're going to have breakfast ready for you.
We better have breakfast for Uncle Dave. So we've got some rain in Polk County, and it's still raining pretty heavily in the Polk County area. But every 20 minutes or so, you start to see that whole mass of rain just inch northeast. So it's only going to be a matter of a few hours when the heavy accumulating flooding rain is done for our area. Now, if you need to get to Orlando, that's another whole issue, because they're going to be in it for much of the morning with all this very heavy rain. And then, of course, Daytona all the way up to Jacksonville and places like that. Maybe not so much Jacksonville, but up to St. Augustine. But you see the spin. It's moving northeast. Technically, it's still a hurricane, barely by the skin of its teeth. It'll probably drop back down to a tropical storm, then move back out over the water, and eventually hit maybe South Carolina. So it's got another landfall coming. It's not done. It's not done yet. But for us, for all intents and purposes, especially along the coast, if you're west of 75, this event is over for you. There are some tropical storm force wind gusts from time to time that you're going to have to deal with this morning. But other than that, the rain is done. But look at that swath of 15 to 20 inches of rain. Amazing. Hardy County, I don't think I've seen Hardy County get that much rain, the whole county, in one event. Maybe if you went back to Charlie. I don't know, but Charlie was moving so quick, I don't think they got that much. So in Hardy County, be careful. Highway 17, 64, in the Wauchula area, Zolfo Springs, some of those side roads, no doubt, are flooded. Roads that you don't typically see flooded are flooded. As far as the wind gusts go right now, that's the only thing left. And you've seen them about 46 to 51. But you've got to remember one thing as well. That wind is whipping in from the water. There's nothing to stop it. So if you go into the Tampa area, notice the wind gusts are not as high. So we'll probably have these tropical storm force wind gusts for several more hours, and then things will get a lot better. But some of the wind gusts that we've noted, 140 in Cape Coral, makes sense because that's where the center was. 104 in Venice, 110 in Fort Myers, and so on and so on. I'm not saying these are the highest wind gusts. These are the ones that we've gotten reports from. How about Fort Meade? Well inland, 76 mile per hour with Sebring in Highlands County, hurricane force wind gusts, and Sarasota around 87. I'm going to toss it over to Tony now because Tony's going to talk about when the wind's going away and the rest of our forecast for the next several days.
Yeah, and thankfully the winds are going to die down, but just looking at those numbers, Dave, Cape Coral, 140 miles per hour. I don't know how many people know this, but I used to live in Cape Coral, and I used to work in that market, and just seeing this storm, my goodness, it just difficult. I remember being there for Irma, and that was a difficult storm. And you just know this is going to be that exponentially worse, especially for those areas along Lee County and Charlotte County. You see the wind gusts there, and it was sustained for quite some time too. Hurricane force, not so bad here locally, but things are going to improve, and that's really where we're headed, right? Over the next few hours, we'll continue to see those winds diminish, and it's not going to be dangerous to be outside necessarily as the storm pulls away, but there are the dangers that you want to think about, right? There are streets that are flooded. You are getting counter trees down. Power lines are going to be down. You just don't want to be out wandering for no reason, just because there are so many dangers and things that people need to clean up, and it's going to take some time, especially the hardest hit areas to our south. So the wind futurecast here, as we go kind of forward, let's say the next, 9 hours or so, we'll continue to see the winds die down. And the bigger numbers here are the sustained winds. And for the most part, they're not going to be any more than 10 to 20 miles per hour by then. And those gusts perhaps near 30. But we'll continue to see those numbers kind of wane through the overnight hours. And then by the time you wake up tomorrow morning, for the most part, the winds have settled, and it's not really as much of a problem. But what we're going to also do as the system pulls away is turn our winds back around out of the north and west, and that's what's going to really help us out in terms of our weather, and our weather is going to improve dramatically. Here's the storm now, satellite radar. You can see just how lopsided it is. All the rain's on the north side. We know it's still a hurricane, a Cat 1 hurricane, but the winds associated with it, which are up to 75 miles per hour right now that we know, are going to continue to pull away. And we're going to continue to see those improvements. There's another look at that dry air that's moving in behind it, and it's just going to rush in and help our forecast improve tremendously. All right, top wind 75, movement is northeast at about 9. Keep in mind, though, the hurricane force winds with this thing only extend about 45 miles outside of the center, and we know it's not everywhere. In fact, it's probably just at a point in time, and those winds are dramatically dropping as the storm continues to be over land. So it's a hurricane now, but it won't be a hurricane for long as it continues to pull to the north, perhaps near hurricane strength or strong tropical storm strength as it passes just to the east of, like, say, Flagler County up towards Jacksonville area, just to their east, and then heading up to the north with a potentially another landfall somewhere along South Carolina as a tropical storm, and then a big rainmaker for North Carolina and West Virginia. So futurecast will continue to show those showers kind of winding down as the system pulls to the north. So where you're seeing heavy rain now across sections of Polk County especially, you are going to see improvements, and it's not going to rain all day as this thing is moving, which is what we like to see. Clouds will slowly start to break. We'll start to see more sunshine and perhaps get rid of all the rain here over the next few days. So we're looking at some really nice weather headed our way, and it's something we'll certainly have earned. 80 degrees are high today. Early showers, early breeze, but dramatic improvements second half of the day. 71 tonight, mostly cloudy and breezy. You'll hang on to some clouds tomorrow. But those temperatures are going to be way below average. Still September, you expect it to be hot, but we're in the 90s, right? Weather is in good shape. We'll get the sun back and allow folks who may have some minor damage.
All right, thank you so much for the latest update on the conditions in the Tampa area. As you heard there from their meteorologist, Tony, the conditions there will continue to improve. Meantime, we want to go ahead and dip live into Fox 35 in Orlando.
Started on air with, I believe, John and Ray, and not as frequently getting those wind bursts and not as powerful. I would say around the 2 a.m. hour, that was when I got that first wind burst, and I'm not a big person, but that's when I got the first wind burst that kind of moved me forward a little bit. But now what we're seeing, more powerful and more frequently getting those wind bursts. I told you, shifted violently. The awning in here held the door open for me. Mother Nature escorted me into the building, and then I did want to point out, yes, you see the lighting in the background, but we heard a crash because one of the fixtures fell off and was rolling down the path in front of the Lakeside Inn. So, yeah, more powerful and more frequently.
Good to see a lot of that. Randy, thanks. Be safe out there. We'll check back in a little bit. Want to show you a new video into the newsroom as well. fallen power lines arcing in Winter Haven. This happened last night as well. The video was posted by the Winter Haven Fire Department. A reminder just to stay away from fallen power lines. They can be dangerous. We see this a lot in storms when people venture out too soon.
You don't see them.
Yes.
And you're walking and you can walk right on one, so you certainly don't want to do that. News crews from all around the world are here in the state of Florida. They are capturing this historic storm. In fact, a photographer from Australia set down his camera to help families who were wading through floodwaters.
Yeah, this happened in Naples as the storm was making landfall, of course, in Lee County yesterday. Take a look at this video.
A hurricane is to Americans what cyclones are to Australians, isn't it? But this one is as big as Florida. That is massive.
Keep going. Keep going.
Are you okay?
Yes. It's an enormous storm. Yeah, no, fine. We're just helping some people through the water here. That's our camera operator, Glenn Ellis, out there. I think you can see trying to help people who are wading away from their homes. We've spoken to a couple of them, and they tell us already that. Their houses have been lost in the water. They're flooded right through, and they've had to abandon them. They've just had no other way of doing it, but they're trying to get out. And obviously, what we've got here is relatively high ground, so we're lucky enough to be able to talk to you, and this is a place where people in Naples, Florida, are now coming to try to get away from the water, essentially.
It's just something to see the people that had no idea that storm surge was going to be what it was, and they're trying to get away at this point. We want to take you back, take a live look at I-4 at mile marker 94 in Longwood. You can see off in the distance there is an emergency crew there. Police are there. There's westbound lanes are blocked. There's a crash with injuries. We're working to get more information, and we'll bring you that as soon as it comes in. I was right outside the office right there that faces I-4. Very little traffic early this morning. There's a reason for that because the conditions certainly are not good to drive. They do not want you out this morning.
Absolutely, unless you absolutely have to be. So let's talk a little bit about the water now, because it really has been filling the streets of Orlando overnight.
Yeah, without a doubt. Take a look at what Fox 3 Edinger endured around 11 o'clock last night.
It is looking even worse than last time you checked in, which I feel like is no surprise, really. But when you're living through it, every time it gets marginally worse, I just keep thinking, how is this happening? So we actually think we found out why this is happening. But first, I want to show you just how far this water level has gone across the street. It's taking up this one lane, and you can see how much it's come over the sidewalk. Into the other three lanes, and unfortunately we are still seeing several cars coming here, and it seems like each and every one of them is just trying to stop this. But I want to show you what the video journalist I'm with pointed out, which is that, I almost lost an AirPod. It's that this gutter is, well, that didn't work. This gutter is completely full up. He thinks that's why this is not draining out. But you can see just how much debris has gathered here, and that is keeping all of this water in the street. But of course, it's got to rush somewhere. But you can see just how much this is forming up around the gutter. And even when I'm trying to push it away, it's still gathering there. It looks like the road is clear for now, so I do want to take you guys across the street to show you something really quickly. It is not just here that the water is forming, actually. So it's gathering there because of the gutter, but we've also got more water forming on this side, and I want to show you just how fast it's moving on this side. If you'll walk with me for just a moment. So here the sidewalk is clear, but they've still got this ditch of culvert. That's helping to keep the street clear. But just look how much it's flooded in this area. I brought a stick just to show you this classic science experiment of just how deep it is. I'm not sure if you can see that. It's obviously going to be deeper further out. And then if you want to, well, it's stuck, but I'll grab another stick just to try to show you how fast this water is moving here. And the water picks up all the debris that's gathered, flowing through. But the water is still pelting on this side and taking up a good bit, even with our efforts to clean out that drain. It is still flooding us inside, and since the rain and the wind doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. Sorry about that flashlight. I just got also hit with some debris. We're under a tree. This is not a good place to be. So as you can see, downtown Orlando right now is just getting pelted. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we are still seeing plenty of cars. This is an area where you might have heard earlier, Connor, one of our other reporters, was mentioning might go under a curfew. That might be a good idea just to keep people off the streets. We also had somebody come up to us, just walk out a few moments ago, just in a hoodie, just walking around casually until they got blown over by the wind and decided to go back in. So, as you just saw, our poor video journalist stumbling as well. It is bad out here. Please do not come out. Please stay inside.
Marie, thanks. By the way, the image on your left, that's a live look at Livingston right there. That's not far from Lake Eola Heights. It runs east-west through downtown. The lights are still working, by the way. It's been switching through, but obviously you're going to see a lot of this damage going through. So that's a light down at Livingston in downtown Orlando. And it brings us to the point, you're going to see a lot of lights that are out.
Right.
And treat that as a four-way stop. They will tell you don't blow through those. Treat that as a four-way stop.
It's so good that you say that, because that's one of the things we do want to emphasize here is that it's our job, right, to be out, which is why we're out. Because sometimes we'll get emails, people say, but you guys are out. Yes, but that is our job. We have to be out to keep you safe. And we really take that very seriously. And as you look at images like that, that's the reason why we really don't want you to be out, right? Because what if there were a car that were underneath that?
Nothing's open.
Nothing's open. That's another good point.
We talked about the person out there in the hoodie.
Yeah.
Don't
but
be
he
that
went back
person.
in very quickly. He learned. He went back in very quickly.
Especially through these morning hours.
Absolutely. All right. So we do have some new images now just into the newsroom as well. We've got viewer Jen Ellsworth. She sent us this picture. Look at this. This is a tree that fell down in the back of her home in Winter Springs. It happened late last night. The high wind and the heavy rain from Ian are causing a lot of damage like what you see here. So when the sun starts to rise, there will be an awful lot of cleanup, assessment, and cleanup to happen.
And Jamie had mentioned the wet ground as well. That's not going to help with some of these trees getting these strong, still hurricane winds.
Yep. Well, we are seeing some of the damage Ian caused in Central Florida. In Seminole County, for example, another large tree collapsed at an apartment complex.
Yeah, Fox 35's Adam Shadoff now has that story from Altamont Springs.
We're at the lake shore at Altamont Springs apartment complex, and it's not terribly bad right now as far as conditions, but clearly earlier it must have been significantly worse. This is a gigantic tree that fell down in this apartment complex, and honestly, I think it was the best possible scenario in the direction that this tree could have fallen, because if you look over here to the right, it did end up hitting some of these cars and doing some damage to some of these cars. But the good news is that it fell away from the buildings, the structures where all the people are inside, hopefully hunkering down right now. But this thing is a monster. It's clearly gigantic. It did some damage to the cars, but the good news is it doesn't look like it did any damage to any of the structures, and there's no people around right now, which is good. I'm hoping nobody was hurt by this giant tree falling down here in Altamont Springs.
Adam, thanks. You know, obviously you worry about the physical nature of getting injured by a tree, but beyond that, some of these trees, people, I mean, they represent their community. They have been there for tens of, decades in many cases as well. This is a live look right now, looking at the conditions, and you can see Orlando is right in the heart of that right now. It is still a hurricane. Ian, winds still above 75 miles an hour, which classifies that. We've come down from a Category 4, nearly Category 5, to now a Category 1. But if it's your house right now, it feels like a very, very strong storm.
And we hear it on our roof here at our Fox 35 studios, and we also see it on the cameras you're looking at on the right side of your screen. As you can see, we also are seeing an awful lot of damage that is happening in and around our Central Florida area as the rain comes down. And as you see, there are cars parked there, which is exactly where they should be. There really, as you said, is no place to go. As you look at the studio camera on top of our own roof here at Fox 35. It's a full
parking lot, and I want to thank all our people behind the scenes that we spent the night here. They have been here all night as well, so certainly thanks to them. We're trying to park away from trees because that's the same thing that a lot of people are facing.
Do you know there was one time, I know we've got to toss to Nestor, but that I was parked in the parking lot at a job I had in TV, and a tree fell on my car.
All right, and thank you so much to our crew there, our team, Fox 35 Orlando, for bringing us the latest in Central Florida. Meantime, a number of people, at least 2.5 million people throughout the state of Florida, without power in the dark right now because of sustained winds, high winds, and hurricane force winds, and because of that storm surge. Right now, Fox 13 in Tampa speaking on this at this current moment. We're going to dip in live to their coverage.
We may just be staging here to go take care of gas stations, but and then if you can see way down in downtown there, mostly lit. When we came into St. Petersburg, we saw it was mostly had power. So the point is, your neighbor could be out, you could have it. It's irritating if you don't have your power, you want it back on. And now we're talking Duke here, Duke Energy. That's who's staging here at Tropicana Field, one of 3 locations. They are ready to hit the road as soon as the sun comes up. Listen to this from their spokesperson.
At Duke Energy, obviously, we have crews already here in the state of Florida, but also for this particular storm, we've brought thousands of crews from across the country. So right now, between those crews here in Florida and across the country, we have 10,000 crews standing by waiting to respond specifically for this storm. And so first, where are these crews coming from? We are so grateful that we have crews coming from as far away as the Midwest, that's Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and even as far away as Maine and the Northeast that are here to help us restore power for our customers. And what happens is when those crews come down, of course, we have to have somewhere to put all of those trucks and the personnel. So at this moment, we have a variety of different what we call staging locations where the trucks can park while the storm is passing through. So those locations right now are the Villages, Tropicana Field, and a company called Ritchie Brothers in Polk County. So in each of those locations, there are either hundreds or in some cases literally thousands of trucks that are parked ready to respond as soon as this storm comes through. And we specifically placed them far enough away so they're away from the storm's path, but close enough so they can rapidly respond as soon as it's safe to do so.
And some advice if you are without power and you're watching us on a tablet or your phone, or maybe you're listening to us on from one of our radio partners. This is good advice. Go around and disconnect or turn off any non-essential electric equipment. You want to leave like one lamp on so you know when the power comes back on, but turn off everything else you can. That way, when it does come back, you avoid overloading circuits and having the power go back out again and having to deal with this anymore. Do not open freezers or refrigerators unless absolutely necessary. Obviously, you want to keep that food cool as long as you can. And never replace a fuse or touch a circuit breaker with wet hands or standing in standing water. Sounds like a no-brainer, but we get caught up, we get excited, we go try to do things, and that's when you can make a deadly mistake. So please be careful when talking about electricity. And I thought this was interesting. I did not know about this. This is right from Duke Energy's website. If your home or business is flooded, Duke Energy actually cannot reconnect power until the electrical system has been inspected by a licensed electrician. If there is damage, an electrician will need to make repairs and obtain verification from your local building inspection authority before power can be restored. So that means if you've been flooded and you're without power, it's going to be a few days before you're going to get power back. If you've just lost it and you don't have any flood damage in your house, as soon as the sun comes up, Duke Energy is going to hit the roads. I know TECO is too. Whatever your power company is, they're going to wait until it is safe to get back out there. And Walter, we're just going to look around and look at. All right, there's an Ohio license plate right now. Let's go checking license plates to see where these trucks are. There's one from Indiana. I mean, these trucks, and they just look at this. I know it's dark, middle of the night, but there are trucks as far as I can see. They go all the way down this parking lot here at Tropicana Field. So they knew they had a plan in place. They put the trucks as close as they could, but still keep them safe. And as soon as that sun comes up, the power army is going to go. Now, see these bucket trucks, and I think somebody mentioned it earlier, Walter. They can't go up in the air if it's 35-mile-an-hour winds or higher, even if it's gusting. Yeah, I mean, and think about it. Oh, you don't want to get up there if it starts getting gusty. No. So they've got to wait until the winds calm down, and they're not going to go through standing water because if there's power lines down, it could be very dangerous. So patience is the best advice. And I know there's not, at least you can open a window and it's a little cooler than today. It's not quite as hot and humid as it was before the storm.
Yeah, for sure. And Charlie, I do love that you pointed out the different license plates, because I find myself, when U-Hauls pass by, I always want to know where they come from, the pictures. So it's great that they all came down here. They left their families to come down and help us out. So it's a great thing.
It's what they do.
Yeah.
And we and our guys and gals will go to North Carolina sometimes and help, and we go out, and that's what they do. And it's an army of help, and they're here to help. It's just going to take a minute or two.
Yeah, for sure. All right. When the sun comes up, they'll get going. Charlie Belcher, we'll talk to you later on. Thanks.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and I believe 30.
All right, great information there from our partners, Fox 13 in Tampa. Now, tomorrow morning, in the morning at 8:45, Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to update us on the current conditions. Now, yesterday, he mentioned that at least 7,000 National Guardsmen and 300 aircrafts will be prepared to help. Now, this is once it is safe for crews to respond with recovery and rescue efforts. Meantime, we want to go ahead and dip in live to our partners at Fox 35 in Orlando.
Get like in this time warp when you continue this, wall-to-wall coverage, right?
Yeah, is it today? Is it tomorrow? Well, what we do know is that we're going to be seeing a lot more rain across the viewing area throughout the day today. And the center of circulation is still on the Florida Peninsula, and a lot of that action happening just to the north of that. So that does include the Orlando Metro as well as our coastal communities. So make sure that you do stick with us as more heavy rain is going to be making its way towards you.
All righty, let's get to the tracking map here in the big weather wall here behind me. I want to update you now, showing you that eventually we're seeing winds down to 65 miles per hour, 75 now, so we still got a Cat 1 hurricane situated over Osceola County there on the southwestern side of the county. We'll lift up in through northeastern Osceola, kind of flank along the west side of Brevard, and boof, right on out to sea as we look longer term, as we get into late tonight through Friday and Saturday and Sunday, paving the way for this to move into the coastal Carolinas and then well inland during that time where Ian will be a distant memory, but leaving a big trail of destruction across the state of Florida. And even on the track now that we see longer term as it becomes a tropical storm, it's still going to have impactful winds. There'll be some surging along the South Carolina coast, very low country as we call it there in the coastal Carolinas, out toward Tybee Island, Georgia, beautiful Savannah there in Chatham County, Georgia. That's going to bring some increase in storm surge there and some higher winds and a rain risk as well. So that's brewing up there. Let's talk about Fox 35 storm tracker radar, the center of circulation. I've outlined it here. The counterclockwise winds rotating around this like a dog chasing his tail, and we have got some serious rain now piling into North Brevard County. You could see the remains of the eye wall here lifting on up. So within that, buried within that, not only do we have the heavy rain, but boy, we got a big old punch of wind right now. Wind's really increasing. I want to start on the live track here for you. Take a look at our rainfall rate. Right now, some lighter rains around Flagler County, but whoo-wee, look at that. You come on down south toward NSB offshore, coast of Volusia County, and right on through south of Oak Hill toward the Volusia County-Brevard border. And we got a corridor right here of tremendous tropical downpours. Right now we're seeing rainfall rates in that range of about 2 to 4 inches per hour. That expands out to Altamont Springs, down to Winter Park, Orlando, and Oak Ridge. And you've seen our live reporters out there in downtown Orlando this morning. Boy, they're getting battered with the heavy winds, the very substantial rains. Another look here shows the polygons flashing. These are active flood warnings now in this corridor as all this energy lifts up and out, generally to the north of 528 there at the beach line. But we increase the pace from Dr. Phillips to Lake Buena Vista and right on up and through the Orlando Metro, through Sanford, and into Volusia County. So that's what we're tracking for you right now. Want to take a look at power outages as we are now getting into the millions across the Sunshine State, especially as we look down toward the impact zone where Ian moved on to the peninsula earlier yesterday, showing us what's happening now over the northern counties. It's been to a lesser extent, but still some numbers here, 64,000 roughly Volusia, and it looks like you get down to Osceola County. We continue with some numbers there, 180,000 down through Polk County, and of course out toward Tampa, toward the impact zone. That kind of speaks for itself. Widespread power outages at this time. So current wind gusts for you: 51 Sanford, 58 at Claremont, 40 out at Leesburg. We're in the 40s now at Melbourne. 67 mile per hour wind gusts currently out at Daytona Beach on our last measurement. And again, as we look at the state right now, easing on the southwestern portion of the peninsula. peninsula, but as you come into the gut of the state, and over east central Florida, closer to that circulation there over Osceola County, we start to see a sharper rise projecting out with those very strong, very gusty winds in nature at this time. Our live look here at our Fox Weather Alert System board. You can see the flash flood warned areas for Orange County, Osceola County, and Seminole. This is going to be going till 6:30 this morning. You can see here that we got the Osceola County look here for you, the flood warning there, 5:15, 4:45. Flash flood warning Orange County to the Osceola County area, and the tornado watch here. Please disregard that. That's some false data now coming into the line at this time. But you can see we have very, very active skies and several warned areas now, with some flooding becoming an issue. Standing water will be an issue after that. So as you take a look at the watches and warnings at this time, you continue for hurricane warned areas shaded in the red. The orange areas here indicate a tropical storm warning. And a look at our high resolution modeling shows us that we're kind of in this rainy mess here through mid-late morning, even into the afternoon. There'll be distinct pockets of rain bands rotating on through, and then we start to see that circulation riding on up and out over North Brevard County, following that NHC track right out to sea and eventually away from us, with much better weather taking shape for the weekend. Talking about some sunshine returning, and overnights may actually, Allison, trend a little more comfortable, as Ian may help to torque a weak cool front through the peninsula, and seeing some modeling indicating maybe some lows for a lot of our viewers down into the 60s longer term.
Wow.
So yeah, a little taste of fall, but dealing with a monster hurricane, made landfall southwest Florida, the impact spreading wide and far. So many great people in our great state of Florida impacted by this storm.
They are, and we are seeing some rain bands that are now moving into our viewing area. And Jamie did a great job at telling you that the flash flood warning that we've been watching in Volusia as well as Seminole counties has been extended until 6:15 this morning. And like I mentioned, we could be seeing it extended even further into the morning hours, and I'll make sure to keep you updated on that. But I do want to take this on a loop for you. You can see all of these outer rain bands. Yes, some of them starting in the Atlantic and then continuing across the interior. So the heaviest rain right now is falling in northern Brevard, Orange, Seminole, as well as Volusia counties this morning, and some of that trying to creep in to Lake County. But I do want to take you down to street level. That's the power of our Fox 35 storm tracker radar. Zoom right on into Winter Springs, Castleberry, Altamont Springs, Maitland. If you live on Red Bug Lake Road, Dyson Drive, we have South Eagle Circle here, Aloma Ave, Temple Drive, Lake Howell Road, or State Highway 426. Very heavy rain is falling, and likely could be seeing some strong wind gusts with that. And then I want to zoom out and take you up to the coast. We have a lot of reporters that are near Daytona Beach, New Smyrna Beach, as well as Ormond Beach. And actually, speaking of Ormond Beach, we have a viewer that was messaging me on Instagram saying, hey, we're watching you. Thank you so much for your coverage. And then he was sending me another message and said, oh, my power just went out. So that's what we are seeing up there, and was letting him know that if your power does go out, you can download the Fox 35 Storm Team weather app and watch us live on your cell phone. So make sure that those phones are charging at the moment. But you can see some very heavy rain moving just south of Daytona Beach through Port Orange, Ponce Inlet, New Smyrna Beach, as well as Edgewater this morning. And I do just want to look at some winds now. Some of the brighter reds are showing actually the strongest, but we've been seeing gusts even higher than this. So sustained anywhere from 30 up to 35 miles per hour. But if we go in and look at those wind gusts, you can see them up to 64 miles per hour in Lakeland, 58 in Claremont, 28 in Ocala, 44 in Palm Coast, and about 67 mile per hour wind gusts in Daytona Beach. We have been watching all of our reporters that are showing boots on the ground saying that these gusts are very strong, and it's not a good idea to go outside until this system does pass. Not only are we going to be seeing the stronger winds there, but also the pockets of very, very heavy rain that our Fox 35 storm tracker radar is doing such a great job at showing. And one more time, we just want to show you that center of circulation right here, but we do have all of those outer rain bands extending into Lake Mary. I do want to take you out to our roof cam from the Fox 35 studios. You can see all of that rain that is falling, and likely around the area going to be seeing some ponding on the roads, some flooding. So you do not want to drive through this. You don't know how deep that water is. We have already seen a lot of rain that started yesterday, continuing throughout the day, and then again throughout the day today. We could be seeing several more inches of rain, especially in areas just to the north of where we are seeing this rain band, because take a look at all of these out over the Atlantic that will slowly be pushing on shore. So we'll continue to monitor things for you. I can send out some arrival times on when you could continue to see that heavy rain. So moving into Lake Helen within the next 16 minutes, at Sanford Airport within the next 18, Sanford in 19, and the Central Florida Zoo in about 21 minutes from now. So Jamie, the power of the Fox 35 Storm Tracker radar is that we get to go down to street level so that you know exactly what conditions you can expect where you live, and that's so important to us. We want to make sure that you and your family are staying safe as Ian is making its way through the viewing area.
Wow, nice job, Allison. Boy, a lot of heavy rain out there. We've got the gusty winds, multiple threats in progress, rain, wind, and flood right now. The tornadic threat is really decreased. We shed the watch at 1 a.m. local time, so we look
And that's
good.
great news, because we were tracking several tornado warnings yesterday, last night.
Yeah. So the threat was there. The threat is eased, but there are 3 more threats again: rain, wind, and flood. So keep it here. We'll continue to keep you up to date. Depend on us here in the Fox 35 Storm Center. Back to you for now.
Jamie and Allison, great job. But we know there are going to be a ton of claims, an enormous amount for property. We're also watching the power outages. The governor saying yesterday we were going to hit the millions. We have done that. 2.2 million right now. And you can see, look at DeSoto County, 100%. Charlotte County, 98%. Lee County, 93%. Those counties got hit so hard. Even Hardee and Manatee at near 90% between the two of them. And so obviously Southwest Florida has been hit very hard. They talk about 30,000 linemen ready to go, but they've got to wait until the conditions are good enough. That is going to be a multi-week process to get all of those individuals back on.
And we hear a lot about neighbors helping neighbors, don't we? And so if you're in Lee County and you know among that few percent that you have got power in Hardee County, where you're the 9% that do, certainly going to be hosting your neighbors and your friends and people who do need it because they don't have it. It is incredible to see those numbers now. We were not expecting that, but to see it there in real time.
In the middle of Central Florida, we are seeing it as well. Obviously not the dark red where they're seeing in Southwest Florida, but we're going to continue to deal with that throughout the morning as well. Speaking of Fort Myers, down there where they got hit the hardest, they sent in just some unbelievable video showing the brunt of Ian.
I tell you what, all right, so this shows viewer Becky Henshaw's view from her balcony. Take a look.
Holy that's a tornado.
And so we don't know if it was indeed a tornado, but what we do know is that winds were just whipping so fast. Take a look at that. I mean, that is just incredible. And again, that is from her balcony. You can see the whole pavilion of her apartment complex and her pool. Yeah, her pool is there, but it's entirely underwater, so you can't even tell that there is a pool there. She also filmed the stairwell that leads to the apartment's parking garage that you see is just totally cut off by floodwater. So she is in essence stuck in her home because she can't go out because of all of the floodwater that is there. She can't get down the stairs because the stairs are flooded as well. So just an incredible piece of video there, right?
One of the areas we've also been showing you hit is Sanibel Island, Lee County there. We've got a better idea of how bad the damage is there. Elise Chingri showing videos from before the storm and after. You can see the entire pool deck, again in this case, underwater. It looks like it's part of the ocean. You really can't tell where the land is and where it's not there. National Weather Service said they were expecting about 8 to 12 feet of storm surge there.
And this is a live look at our DOT camera. This is along State Road 408 in Hiawassee. Take a look at that. I mean, this is one of the things that we like to see. Not a lot of cars out there on the roadways, but we also see that there is some pooling water. I think you can see there on the left of your screen. And that's really what you don't want to be driving in at this time of the night, because you really don't know what's underneath it.
Water
you don't
and debris,
know.
you're not going to be able to see it until
You
it's
just
too late.
can't see it. And so wait until the morning light, folks. If you do have to go out, wait until officials are able to get out and assess the damage and let you know that it is indeed safe to go outside. But it is always nice to see empty highways when you're dealing with a situation
almost
like
everything
this.
closed. And with Disney, Universal, and SeaWorld, they're all closed. Businesses are closed. Fort Canaveral still closed today, so stay at home.
And can I just mention very quickly, especially for our tourists, right, who are here, who may not be used to hurricanes, right, this is the time you all really do want to stay inside because you don't know what to expect. And so just wait until officials tell you it is safe. Turn on Disney on TV. Yeah. I know it's not the same thing, but at least
we're waiting to see what Orlando International is going to do. I'm sure when the storm passes, we will get the official word there. Yeah.
So we're also getting some more video, right, that we do want to bring you. This is of some of the rescues, right, that are taking place all across Central Florida.
Yeah, some great rescues. Firefighters in Naples, boy, they had a long day as well, rescuing someone out of their car stranded in flooding. The floods just overwhelmed some of the people there. They had to cover the hood of the car there. It was that deep. Take a look. I see them breaking out the window. I mean, these are things they train for and never know if they're going to have to use them. They did. Naples Fire and Rescue posting the video. Keep in mind that same department's own fire station, that was the one that was flooded with chest-high water earlier. So they have their own home flooded. Now they're out helping others.
And more people are sharing videos online of the damage in their own neighborhoods. But this is the first that we've seen here into the Fox 35 newsroom. Take a look at this. This is a boat that actually washed up right onto somebody's yard. This is in Cape Coral, by the way. You know, as the sun starts to rise around, we're likely going to see more damage, right? And a lot of strange debris left over around people's properties, but that boat, probably one of the stranger things we'll see.
All right, we're going to continue to bring you the latest from our colleagues over at Fox 35 Orlando. For now, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back.
Good morning and welcome into Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Gabrielle Amato, and we are continuing our coverage of Hurricane Ian as it continues to barrel through Florida. At the moment, Hurricane Ian continues through Florida as a Category 1 storm. The latest update as of 2 o'clock in the morning from the National Hurricane Center puts this storm at moving at just 9 miles per hour, winds at 75 miles per hour, with the next update coming down at 5 a.m. Eastern time. We have been piggybacking off of our Fox 35 coverage, and we're going to send you out to them in just a moment. But we do want to let you know that currently 2.4 million people are without power in Florida. There is extensive damage in the Fort Myers and Naples area. At 8:45 a.m. Eastern time, the next update from Governor Ron DeSantis is going to happen, and of course we'll bring you that live, raw, and unfiltered here on the show. But as promised, we are powered by our owned and operated stations. Our Fox 35 Orlando team are actually gearing up for this storm to make landfall in the Orlando area. So I do want to send you out to their coverage. Let's listen in.
Inquiries just now on Twitter out of New Smyrna Beach, and if you're watching our coverage, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm glad you decided to join us. You're asking me what in the world is going on in NSB right now out here in Volusia County. Well, you all have a rain band now that is moving through your neck of the woods. You can see two distinct rain bands, one here, and both are producing tremendous wind gusts right now in the order of 55 to 60 miles per hour, even higher in some of those locations, and big time rains. Those rains begin to taper off a little bit over Flagler County, though still coming down pretty good there. From Port Orange down to NSB, this is what we've got for you. Big time rain amounts, about 4 inches per hour at least in these pink splotchy areas here. This is our rainfall rate. Our live weather radar is dual pol, P-O-L. That allows us to essentially x-ray the innards, the guts of these showers and isolated storms as they move through in through those rain bands, and it gives us a good idea as to what's going on. And that would be the name of the game now is the heavy rain and these tremendous wind gusts that are loading all across the beachfront and across the metro now. Those heavy rain returns expand all the way out in the southern Lake County, south of the Florida Turnpike and Claremont. And you come over to Lake Buena Vista, into Kissimmee, the area lakes through Metro Orlando, and all the way back across the northern metro into the coastal counties and communities, and that's where we really see the heavy rain falling. So this is a look here at the camera. I believe this might be downtown, though, labeled I Drive, but either way.
Yeah, that looks like downtown.
Yeah, it is downtown, of course, and does show us the winds whipping and those raindrops flying back and forth there. So we continue with the hurricane warning. That is the red shaded counties here. There's a lot of them, and as we look at the tropical storm warned areas, these are in orange to the northwest counties and then back down toward Vero Beach and Fort Pierce and into the Stewart area along our Treasure Coast. So the outlook on our high-res modeling showing us that we've got the circulation, big-time rains through at least mid-late morning, and then we'll start to see things easing up. Breezes will still be spurting pretty sporty levels, probably about 35, 40 on the gust, but as we separate from Ian's circulation, which is broad and vast, covers a lot of areas now, that will have a tendency of helping to alleviate this real gusty condition and help those raindrops dry on up. But from now all the way into our Friday, tomorrow at 8 a.m., additional raindrops here. Of note is what's happening around Volusia County at this time. And as we look at the wind speed and gusts, we've got your wind speed shaded here in the white.
Kills, whether it's flooding, whether it's driving into it, whether it's storm surge, that's what kills you.
It's one of the top 5 hurricanes to ever hit the Florida Peninsula. But the fact is, there's going to be damage throughout the whole state, and people in other parts of the state, be prepared for some impacts.
Yeah, top 5 hurricanes. It could be top 3 hurricanes. And now more than 2 million people are without access to power tonight as Hurricane Ian batters the Sunshine State. The damage assessment only just beginning. And the storm, as you might imagine, a long way from being over. Still a Category 2 tonight and headed inland directly toward Orlando, where they're saying it could sit for more than 24 hours. That means it will drop feet of rain. We have team coverage tonight, and we begin with Will Nunley. He's near where the hurricane first made landfall in Fort Myers. Will, it's been a long day for you. Good evening. What's the latest?
Good evening. Yeah, for so many struggling tonight without power and without
communication really in most cases, trying to reach family and loved ones. We're talking about waves and storm surge so powerful that it broke the gauges that the Weather Service uses to record that data. Meanwhile, we still have debris flying around where we are tonight here in Fort Myers. This is a sign from Colonial Boulevard, one of the arteries in and out of town. The rain has died down a little bit where we are, and so we're starting to see a little bit more activity on the roadways. We've seen our first 2 convoys of trucks trying to begin to stage, but I'm going to tell you, the wind has not died down enough for that utility work to go. In addition to the power being out to so many in this area, now the cell phone service is starting to go out. And so people that are waiting to be rescued, we heard in a press conference earlier with Governor Ron DeSantis that there are hundreds of people waiting in a queue to try and get rescued with water coming into their homes. And so this is going to be a very long night for so many people waiting on word if they can even reach rescue crews to try and get out. But again, a tremendous amount of water has fallen here in Fort Myers with flooding happening, storm surge happening in the downtown area. We're going to have some incredible pictures to bring you throughout the night. We're just now trying to move our location for the first time in 12 hours. We just haven't been able to move from here. Back to you.
We will get back to you as the weather permits and the news breaks. Will Nunley live for us down in Fort Myers. Will, thank you. And now one area where many Floridians hope to escape the worst of the storm is Orlando. It is now getting pummeled by Ian, with the National Hurricane Center saying the area is now facing sustained winds of about 105 miles per hour. Category 2 now in the Orlando area, but the water is also a huge concern there. They are expecting not inches, they are expecting possibly feet of rain. Let's bring in correspondent Nate Foy. He's just southwest of Orlando in the Windermere area. He's got the latest from there, and those lakes are also a concern in Windermere. Nate, what's happening where you are?
Well, Trace, I can tell you the wind and the rain is certainly slapping us in the face right now, increasing in intensity. It's been constant all day, but as we get a gust right now, and I got to keep an eye behind me because again, we're probably not set up in the best spot right here as the intensity increases pretty rapidly, but there are some tree branches that we're keeping an eye on. I can tell you in Orange County, where we are, over 30,000 people have lost power. You mentioned right at the top of the show, over 2 million now in Florida, and we're at the point where people are going to have to wait until after this storm passes to get their power fixed. Here in this Windermere community, some people here lost power at 6:30. They were saying they don't expect to get it back until Saturday. Now, I lived in Fort Myers for 6 years leading up to this, and as you mentioned, a lot of people will come to Orlando. I'll be honest, I've done it before. My little brother from Miami came up and stayed with my uncle here in Orlando. Something a lot of people do to escape the storm surge that we saw that just devastated Southwest Florida. But what you don't escape is the flash flooding. You mentioned the 30 inches of rain. That's going to be a big thing tomorrow. The Orange County Sheriff's Office putting out a message tonight saying that the flooding could be catastrophic. They are telling people stay inside. Do not drive through flooded streets. It's difficult to tell exactly how deep that water is. So it is, after seeing the images, Trace, living in Fort Myers, my heart just goes out to the people who are dealing with horrific conditions. I was there with Hurricane Irma back in 2017. I visited people whose homes got flooded in Bonita Springs. They rebuilt it. Here we are 5 years later. They have to deal with it again. In Orlando, they're hoping that that level of devastation doesn't spread farther east. And of course, without the threat of storm surge, it won't be that bad here, but it's certainly not safe. And it's, something that we'll be following. We'll send it back to you.
And you lived in Fort Myers, Nate. I lived in the Orlando area, still have a sister that lives there. And just hours ago, they were thinking, we should be in the clear because this is so far to the south of us and then it's coming up. My question to you is, we were showing at the top of the screen, Nate, it was 11:04, 11:06 now as you speak. And the meteorologists are saying really the hurricane will not really get over Orange County and Orlando until about midnight and then sit there for a very long time. Are people ready? Are they hunkered down? Because some of this flash flooding, Nate, could come in the middle of the night.
I think that people are as ready as they can be. Trace, you're always going to have some people who don't take the threat maybe as seriously as they should. But the homeowners that we were speaking with here in the Windermere community, they've already lost their power. The ones that we know at least had generators, so they have, the basic necessities that they need. So I think people are as ready as they can be, but you mentioned this is kind of a community that sometimes people think, maybe wrongly so, is a safe haven. And with the newest models, I mean, this storm is coming right for where we are right now, and it is certainly not a safe place to be. So for the sake of everybody in this community and in the Orlando area, I certainly hope they're ready for it. I guess we'll find out in the aftermath.
Yeah, and you talk about Orlando being a safe haven, Nate, and it truly is, because for years, you know, people have thought of that as kind of, you know, insulated from the coast. It's about 50 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. It's about 70 miles from the Gulf. And so they've always believed that they are kind of just out of harm's way. And even the years when I worked there, we would send people to the coast and not as much in Orlando. Well, now this thing is barreling at a Category 2 strength right toward Orlando. And one of the big concerns they have in that area, Nate, is that, you know, the flash flooding, they get a lot of rain in Orlando, the flash flooding could be significant. And these rivers and lakes, there are lakes everywhere in Orlando. These rivers and lakes could prove to be very problematic in the hours and days to come.
That's absolutely right, Trace. I mean, you know, Governor DeSantis has said that essentially this storm is going to move right across I-4, which cuts across Florida. Orlando is right in the center of that. And, you know, as the storm moves across land, it slows down. And as you mentioned, possibly will stall out over Orlando. And the longer, even if it's a Category 1 or a tropical storm, the longer that it's hovering over this area, the more rain it's just going to dump down on the Orlando area. And it's going to be, you know, a big flash flooding event. Again, the Orange County Sheriff's Office describing it as potentially catastrophic.
Yeah, Nate Foy, back to you as the news warrants. He brings up a good point, because a few years ago we covered Hurricane Harvey, and it hit the Houston coast, right? It hit the Texas coast, and then it went up to Houston, and it sat there. And it sat there for days, and it flooded out the entire area, some of the most devastated flooding we have seen in the United States in decades. Nate Foy, again, back to you. Great job as always. Joining us now is Fox Weather meteorologist Kendall Smith on where this storm is headed next. We know it's Orlando. We don't know exactly what the ramifications of it sitting over Orlando are quite yet. Ken.
Yeah, Trace, and I'm glad that you mentioned what exactly took place with all of that heavy rain. We have a stationary boundary that's draped across the region that is doing exactly that with Hurricane Ian. Now, we do have our latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center that has just come in as of 11 o'clock, and it is now showing Hurricane Ian as a Category 1 storm. So we have watched it as quickly weakened from a Category 4 at the time of landfall, which occurred just after 3 o'clock Eastern this afternoon near Cayo Costa State Park. This is in Lee County, Florida, and it had sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. It made its second landfall in Punta Gorda with 145 miles per hour, and now it has worked its way further inland, and we're watching its impacts right now in central Florida, just about 70 miles to the south-southwest of Orlando. Orlando just getting walloped right now with all of the heavy rain. Notice those very impressive cloud tops showing those very strong thunderstorms in the eye wall of the storm. Now, we do have a lot of heavy rain wrapping around. That's why we have numerous flash flood warnings still in effect. They will remain in effect for several more hours. So Port Charlotte over to Sarasota, Fort Myers, some of the hardest hit locations, and in particular where we're seeing the majority of those power outages this evening. Now, look at the past 24 hours and how much rain has fallen. Just an extensive rain has fallen, the swath really from where we saw landfall over to Venice, Port Charlotte. Notice that area of pink. That's indicating, Trace, 18 to 24 inches of rain. That's a lot of rain. 19.9 inches, 15.5 inches. We just started pixel and pouring on a few other locations in that heaviest swath of rain that's set up. But now look at where we're headed over the next 3 days. It is not going anywhere anytime soon. This storm is moving to the north-northeast at just a crawl at only 8 miles per hour, meaning that it is going to sit and churn and dump copious amounts of rain all across central and northern Florida. Notice where Daytona Beach and Orlando are located. They are located in the bullseye, if you will, where some of the heaviest rain will fall. Daytona Beach, we are anticipating potentially 12 to 18 inches over the next three days. In Orlando, a little less, but still a lot of rain, 8 to 12 inches will fall over the next 72 hours. Lakeland, much of the same, right along I-4 and also over to Ocala. So this is a very serious situation. We do not want anyone to let their guards down because this system, Trace, it means business. It is going to be catastrophic for so many Floridians. And I am very interested to see what day brings, especially in terms of the devastation that we will be witnessing right along the coast of southwestern Florida. Trace, back to you.
Yeah, and they are very concerned about tornadic activity in Orange County, in Osceola County, in Seminole County, in Brevard County, in Volusia counties, all of those central Florida counties. I noticed, Kendall, on the screen earlier, the speed of Ian, it looks like it's 8 miles per hour now. I was watching most of the day, it was 9 miles per hour. Now it's 8. Do we believe this is going to slow even further?
So it should remain pretty steady at this pace to the north-northeast. And I'll try to see if we can get this to keep progressing to show you the anticipated path. Really, these top wind reports, I mean, just incredibly impressive. But what the track shows is that we will be watching tomorrow morning. It will still be at a Category 1 strength. Then eventually it will emerge back into the Atlantic, potentially gaining a little bit of strength as it makes its third and final landfall sometime on Friday. This is what I wanted to get to. Notice where it is going to set up shop. In between Savannah and Charleston is where we are anticipating that third landfall to come. It will be a tropical storm at that time, but still nonetheless, look at all of the locations that are going to be feeling the impacts. All of the state of South Carolina, North Carolina, portions of southwestern Virginia, even into Tennessee. So this is a very serious situation.
Triple threat, hurricane, major hurricane, and then you have a rain event and then a hurricane all over again. Kendall Smith, we'll get back to you. Thank you for continuous coverage of Hurricane Ian. Download the Fox Weather app and stream Fox Weather 24/7. You'll be glad you did. It is well worth it. The latest sights and sounds of Hurricane Ian, which has been packing a powerful punch across the state of Florida all day and is continuing its path of destruction. Let's bring in some of the local officials responsible for preparing and responding to disasters like this. Let's go to Sarasota County Sheriff Kurt Hoffman. Sheriff, I'm just wondering, because we know that daybreak is going to bring some devastating images. What are you hearing? Are there people that need help right now that you can't get to? What's the latest where you are, Sheriff?
Good evening, Trace. We're just getting a few cars out to check some of those areas initially. We've not got a full crew out going through the neighborhoods, but what we're hearing from our 911 center here where I'm at right now is a lot of folks in need. This is obviously a high wind storm and a high water storm. We are a coastal county. We have a lot of folks, particularly in the south end of our county, that have got significant damage down there. We expect within the next couple of hours we will be getting into those streets and doing early assessments as the sun comes up.
You talk about early assessment, Sheriff. I'm wondering if any of your deputies have been out at all to kind of assess the damage that is even close by the various stations around Sarasota County. I'm wondering if you've seen anything, and is there any way to expedite some of these rescue efforts that might be underway over the next 24 hours?
Well, obviously, Trace, our first issue is, the wind has to die down enough for emergency response, fire, EMS, law enforcement crews to be able to get out there. And that's just happened recently. So, yes, we do have a few preliminary units out, particularly in the south end of the county. We're seeing what you would expect, flooding as a coastal county, trees down, electrical lines down. Several county buildings and city buildings in the south end of our county have had damage to the roof, damage to generators. Knocked out down in the south end of the county. So yes, we are seeing that now. We expect between 3 and 4 a.m. when we get many more crews out throughout the county from the north end to the south end, that we'll see damage that's consistent with that.
You talk about trees down, Sheriff, and power lines down. We're hearing reports that 81% of customers in Sarasota County are experiencing some power outages. How devastating is that? How long might it take to repair? And how does that hamper the various rescue efforts that could be underway?
Well, that's a good question, Trace. And I've been working the last half hour with the CEO from Florida Power and Light, executives with Florida Power and Light. We're getting the crews in here now to be able to repair some of those areas. And you're right, we're seeing about the same percentage that you've reported, 80% from the north end to the south end of the county. We have an elderly population here in Sarasota County. We have some special needs shelters for those patients. In the south end of our county, we have one shelter that has over 400 folks that need oxygen and other medical necessities, and that's going to be our first priority as soon as we can get these FPL crews in there and obviously power back to some of our medical facilities, particularly in the southern end of the county.
Yeah, we talk about trouble everywhere, Sheriff, but is there any word on, people looting in Sarasota County? I know some places have had some reports of that. Anything on that front? And what would you say to the people who are doing that?
Well, for the people who are doing it or anticipating coming and causing trouble in Sarasota County, that's not going to go well for them. We have a very unified command here with a variety of municipal police departments and the sheriff's office. We have over 1,000 members in our agency that are going to make sure that our community and our citizens are safe, first and foremost, from weather events and from criminals that would prey on them. And we're certainly aware of that, and we've discussed that at a staff level. We've not seen that yet, Trace, but I can tell you here in the center behind me, these dedicated men and women have got 590 calls, I believe, in backlog right now. So we're going through those, everything from alarms to medical calls to law calls to road blockage, that kind of thing. So we're trying to make our way through those backlog calls as we now start to come out of the ability to go out and actually be in the community and see what's going on, as opposed to here in the communication center taking those calls. So, in the next hour or two, we'll have a much better assessment of the damage. But the preliminary reports are, as I mentioned, trees, water, power lines, all the things that you would expect from a storm of this significance.
Yeah, you talk about trees and water, Sheriff, and the pictures we're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen show nothing but people kind of wandering around and water everywhere. And yet the Herald Tribune today headline says that Manatee, Sarasota officials urge residents to limit water usage and the flushing of toilets. It goes on to say approximately 15% of the county's sewage lift stations were without power and urge residents to limit how often they flush toilets. Mike Milet, Sarasota County Public Utilities Director, roughly estimated about 30% of the county's lift stations are without power. If power is out at your home, most likely power is out at your lift station serving your home. And some of the stations have generators, while others don't. That's also a problem, because you might have people that are stuck, that are short on water and really short on resources, Sheriff.
Yeah, so I was down with Mike just in the floor below where I'm at right now, Trace, having that conversation. I think the statistics that you just mentioned are correct. Now, we're a barrier island community, so we shut that water off on those barrier islands. We messaged that so that if we did have a break in the system out there on the barrier islands, the rest of the county would not be affected. And that's a fragile ecosystem out there along the coast and those barrier islands. So those sewer lines, those water lines are vulnerable. When we have a break, it means we don't have the pressure, we don't have the ability to have water for the mainland. And our initial, indications are we do have a break somewhere in the line. Our pressure is down, and thankfully, because we shut it down to the barrier islands, we'll be able to find that, we'll patch it, and then we'll be able to restore it, for all of Sarasota County. But that's the reason why we do that, and we messaged that well ahead of time. We did that many hours ago and messaged that to our community.
Yeah, best of luck to you, Sheriff, and the people down there. We know you've got your hands full, a myriad of problems. Let us know if you have any messages you need to send, Sheriff. We'll put you back on the air, and we'll bring you back as the news breaks. Sheriff of Sarasota County, Kurt Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us, sir. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Trace. Have a good evening.
And as the sheriff was talking about here, we talk about hurricanes and historic hurricanes, right, in terms like that. And what we often don't do is kind of go back and revisit the history. You had Hurricane Michael about 4 years ago hitting up near Panama City in the Panhandle in Florida, Category 4, Category 5 hurricane, right? You had Hurricane Andrew back in 1992. It hit South Florida, Homestead, Category 5 hurricane. Ian, Category 4. But when they go back and review this, there is a possibility this could also be considered a Category 5 hurricane. When they adjust some of the numbers and they look and review at these things, it happens a lot. And Ian barreled across and came ashore just where Hurricane Charlie came ashore in 2004, kind of taking that similar path up toward Orlando, and now, as we have been telling you, it is about to sit over Orlando for hours and hours and drop what could be feet of rain. Much more live coverage ahead as Hurricane Ian barrels across central Florida. Fox News at Night, special edition.
The roof is on the ground.
Ooh. That's really bad. Well, the city of Tampa did not get the direct hit from Hurricane Ian that was originally predicted, but residents there still facing treacherous conditions, including widespread flooding and heavy winds. Correspondent Madeline Rivera is on the ground in Tampa with more on how things are looking there. Madeline.
Hey, Trace. Well, we were out there in the elements for hours. We actually had to retreat to this little alcove here to just get some refuge. But even here, you could really feel the strength of the winds whipping things up. I will say it has weakened some, but people here are still being encouraged to stay vigilant because flash flooding was something that officials were very worried about. Tampa was expected to see between 18 to 20 inches of rainfall, a 4 to 6 foot storm surge, which when you compare it to other parts of southern Florida, yes, not as bad, but still something people here were told to look out for. We are in downtown Tampa, which, as you can see behind me, pretty empty right now. It's usually a pretty busy area, but as you can see behind me, we haven't really seen anyone out here over the last couple of hours. So we did see some people coming in and out of the hotel behind us, which, as you can see, doors and windows boarded up with plywood. But again, I would say over the last couple of hours, people have really heeded the warnings to just go inside, shelter in place until the storm passes through. I have been in touch with a spokesperson from the city, and they told me that there have been no major emergencies in the city. They have seen and addressed a few fires. Those were from some downed power lines, but they say nothing that they couldn't handle. So that is the latest from here in Tampa. But of course, people here still being told to just be vigilant, watch out, shelter in place, and fight it out.
Yeah, and they know the drill, Madeline Rivera. And you think about this, just 24 hours, 36 hours ago, there was a lot of worry that this storm was going to go directly toward Tampa. And Tampa has all kinds of new building. You have to remember, Madeline, that Tampa is, in fact, it is the most bustling real estate market in the country. And they were wondering if all that real estate, that brand new building, could handle Cat 5 hurricane winds. They didn't get a chance to find out, fortunately for them. But the mayor says that this ain't over yet. There's still a long way to go for this storm. Madeline Rivera, back to you as the news breaks. Thank you. Meantime, first responders and volunteer rescue teams are getting ready for recovery efforts as Hurricane Ian moves northeast. Now, it's important to note that many fatalities happened after a natural disaster. Here to tell us why that is and what you can do to stay safe is Cajun Navy relief volunteer Jesse Fenwick and board-certified medical doctor and Fox News contributor Dr. Jeanette Neshawat. To you first, Jesse Fenwick. I'm a big fan of the Cajun Navy. I have covered more natural disasters and hurricanes than I care to remember. Your group does yeoman's work. I mean, you go in at the worst time and you help people out, and you have pulled out more people out of bad situations than I can even remember. I'm wondering, Jesse, does the Cajun Navy have a plan in this case in Florida? The damage is widespread. Where do you go first? What do you do first?
Trace, you're exactly right in the assessment. The damage is so widespread, and the question you ask is the one that's on everybody's mind. Where do you even start with something this big? Right now, we're putting our ICS, our incident command structure, in place, and we've got a Pathfinder team, which I'm a part of, forward deployed to a safe position, but a forward deployed position where we can assess those needs and just see what's really going on. Florida's always been so self-sufficient. They've always had such a great handle on everything. We're just worried that this one's going to be big, and we want to be there and be able to help out any way that they need us, really. We're waiting on them to tell us what they need.
And a lot of people waiting on you as well. Dr. Neshawat, as you look at this and you see the widespread devastation across Florida, I'm wondering from a medical perspective, Doctor, what do you worry about? Do you worry about the amount of water? Do you worry about what's in the water? How do you look at this?
Yes, all of the above, Trace. Most of the complications, most of the hospitalizations, and unfortunately, most of the deaths that occur when it comes to natural disasters happen afterwards because of the fatigue and the stress and the lack of access to resources when it comes to a natural disaster. So one of the biggest concerns is the flood water. The water it's filled with sewage, wastewater, chemicals, debris, glass, nails, metal. And so you'll see people walking through the waters and they can get cuts and abrasions and lacerations, They can get infected. They can become severe wounds if they're not cleaned properly with soap and water. You can develop cellulitis. You can develop staph infections. That's why it's so important to make sure you're up to date with your tetanus and your hepatitis and that sort of thing. And then we'll see other types of things. People are going to be hungry. They're going to be thirsty. You have to make sure your water that you're drinking, the food that you're eating, is not contaminated. Otherwise, we'll see nausea and vomiting, upset stomach, diarrhea, which could lead to dehydration. We also see things like upper respiratory tract infections, asthma exacerbations from the mold and the mildew. A lot of the things in your household, once people go back to their homes, things can be contaminated. And if it's not washable, it's recommended, by the CDC to toss it out because of the potential for contamination, for chemical contamination. And then, we have to also remember, Trace, PTSD. This is a very traumatizing event. Anxiety, depression, PTSD. Fortunately, Governor DeSantis and his team are doing an incredible job of, allocating resources and using FEMA, and also this distress hotline that is available for those who are, suffering, who are going through anxiety and depression.
It's a very good point. I just want to get to you very quickly, Jesse, and we should note we're going to bring you back because we have so much more to ask you. But Jesse, I want to know what concerns you more. Is it the storm surge along the coast, or is it the continued rain and all the water in the inland part of the state, in Orlando specifically? I've got about 15 seconds, sir.
Yeah, definitely along the coast is our primary concern. The rain coming in and storm surge combining there at those coastal areas are really where floods can occur first off and most severe. That will continue inland, but I think our first priority is the coastline.
Jesse Fenwick, Dr. Neshwat, we will see you both in a bit. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Coming up, I'm checking in with our reporters on the ground in Florida, plus what we know about the severity of the damage as Hurricane Ian barrels across the Sunshine State.
Time Dorsey startup, which allowed users to share short messages with their followers, was a novelty. But in the coming years, it would become increasingly an important source of news and social discourse as it gathered millions of users around the world. Twitter now plays an outsized role in politics, culture, and even in democracy itself. As Twitter has grown, so have the risks posed by bad actors looking to exploit its opportunities and the data it holds. In July 2020, 2 teenagers hacked into the accounts of Twitter employees, gaining access to a number of high-profile accounts, including now President Biden and former President Obama. Those 2 teenagers then sent a series of tweets from the accounts and scammed Twitter users out of more than $100,000 in Bitcoin. In response, then CEO of Twitter, Dorsey, turned to a trusted name in the world of cybersecurity to lead an overhaul of Twitter's security practices. And for more than a year, that's what this individual tried to do, until he was terminated by Twitter and their new CEO this past January. Last month, this individual released a whistleblower disclosure detailing a number of alarming allegations about Twitter's security practices. Without objection, his disclosure will be entered into the record. That whistleblower's name is Peter Zetko, or as he's more commonly known, Mudge. Mudge, thank you for joining us. You are here pursuant to a subpoena, not because you were opposed to appearing before the committee, but so the public can hear the details of your disclosure. You've alleged a number of security flaws and weaknesses within Twitter, flaws that may pose a direct threat to the safety and privacy of Twitter's hundreds of millions of users, as well as America's national security. The story actually began in 2011 when the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, first concluded that Twitter was playing fast and loose with user data. They found that Twitter had, quote, deceived customers and put their privacy at risk by failing to safeguard their personal information. The company was ordered by the FTC to, quote, protect the security, privacy, confidentiality, and integrity of user data. But you've claimed those changes have never been made. And more broadly, you allege that compared to other technology companies, Twitter's security standards remain woefully deficient. You allege that thousands of employees within the company have extraordinary access to sensitive information of Twitter's users, and that there is little oversight over how that information is assessed. Some Twitter users tuning in this morning may be asking, well, what's the big deal? When you sign up for Twitter, you knowingly hand over your email, your phone number, other information. That's how it is with most social media companies. But you expect, do you not, that these companies will take precautions to protect the personal information you give them. It's like depositing money at the bank. When you hand your money to the teller, they take it behind the counter and put it in a vault. But at Twitter, according to our witness today, the door to that vault is wide open. And that vault contains a lot more information about you than you can imagine. Twitter doesn't just have access to your tweets and email address. They also have access to all of the data necessary to directly access your device and even pinpoint your exact location. Say you're an American citizen, you're exercising your First Amendment freedom at a political protest, or maybe you're a woman seeking reproductive health care. If you're a Twitter user, it may not just be you at the protest or in that healthcare facility. Unbeknownst to you, someone else may be right there with you in your pocket or purse. Of course, many of us are comfortable with some of the programs on our phones having location data. It's helpful, but when that data isn't secure, we become vulnerable to bad actors, scam artists, stalkers, even foreign agents. To give an example, earlier this year, a Saudi national who worked for Twitter was convicted by a federal jury for stealing the personal data of dissidents who criticized the Saudi regime and handing the data over to the Saudi government. This is a matter of life and death, as we know, for these dissidents, as the butchering of Jamal Khashoggi made clear. There's also the matter of Twitter's reach. It was one of the largest megaphones that world leaders ever had at their disposal. We've already seen what can happen when small-time hackers break into Twitter accounts belonging to government officials. But what if? What if next time it isn't two teenagers trying to pull a crypto scam? Imagine if it's a malicious hacker or a hostile foreign government breaking into the president's Twitter account, or sending out false information, claiming there was a terrorist attack on one of our citizens. We could see widespread panic. The bottom line is this: Twitter is an immensely powerful platform that cannot afford gaping security vulnerabilities. Today we have a chance to engage in a good faith bipartisan discussion to ask what needs to be done. A final point. Politicians on both sides of the aisle have criticized Twitter. I, for one, believe that Twitter should be doing far more to combat the proliferation of hate speech and conspiracy theories. Republicans, on the other hand, claim that Twitter censors their conservative speakers. I urge my colleagues to set some of these partisan differences aside and try to find the common ground we need to establish security standards that will be raised today by our whistleblower. With that, I turn to our ranking member, Senator Grassley.
Thank you, Chairman Gerbert. A very important issue that you have brought before this committee, and I thank you for doing it. I, for one, want people to know that I love using Twitter. But we also know that big tech companies, such as Twitter, collect vast amounts of data on Americans. In the hands of foreign adversaries, this data is a gold mine of information that could be used against America's interest. Twitter has a responsibility to ensure that the data is protected and doesn't fall into the hands of foreign powers. Americans rightly expect that Twitter will protect that information. Thanks to a whistleblower that comes forward, we've learned that Twitter hasn't secured the data of tens of millions of Americans and countless other users. That whistleblower is here today, so we welcome you, Mudge. He comes before the committee today not only as an expert in the field of cybersecurity, but also as a whistleblower. I think all of my colleagues know that I have a great deal of admiration for whistleblowers. I've always said that whistleblowers are patriotic individuals who often sacrifice their own career as well as their livelihood to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. Thank you very much for being here. Because of Mudge's disclosures, we've learned that personal data from Twitter users was potentially exposed to foreign intelligence agencies. For example, his disclosure indicates that India was able to place at least 2 suspect foreign assets within Twitter. His disclosures also note that the FBI notified Twitter of at least 1 Chinese agent in the country, company, I should say. Based on allegations, Twitter also suffers from a lack of data security. Due to that failure, thousands of Twitter employees can access user data. That data that they don't need access to in order to do their job, yet they have access. And if foreign assets work for Twitter, that means these foreign assets can also access the data. To put a finer point on the allegations, Twitter has allegedly used data it collects and the tools it has to geolocate individuals who made threats against board members. In the hands of a foreign agent embedded at Twitter, a foreign adversary could use the same technology to track down pro-democracy dissidents within their country, but also to spy on Americans. This has actually happened in the past. In 2019, 2 Twitter employees were indicted by the FBI. They used their position at Twitter to access private user data and then gave it to Saudi Arabia. These foreign agents were able to access and provide personal information on more than 6,000 individuals of interest to the Saudi government. Simply put, the whistleblower disclosures paint a very disturbing picture of a company that's solely focused on profit at any expense, including at the expense of safety and security of its users. Additionally, it's been alleged that Twitter knowingly violated a consent decree that it entered into with the Federal Trade Commission 2011. That consent decree required Twitter to address their access control failures. However, instead of complying with the consent decree and fixing these very serious security matters, it alleged that Twitter executives, specifically CEO Agrawal, intentionally misled Twitter's board of directors. So, I'm concerned that for almost 10 years, the Federal Trade Commission didn't know or didn't take strong enough action to ensure Twitter complied with the consent decree. This is a consent decree that was intended to protect Twitter users' personal information. As Congress considers federal data privacy legislation, I think it's very important that we draw on these revelations about how Twitter views its obligations with federal regulators. Congress should also be mindful of the FTC's ability or lack thereof to successfully oversee these important issues. Twitter also needs to answer questions about its content moderation it was revealed to this committee that Twitter outsources a great deal of consent moderation to foreign countries. They have close to 2,000 employees in other countries whose job is to screen tweets by Americans. They also lack the appropriate amount of translators to ensure that tweets in other languages are complying with Twitter's own rules. Mudge had limited visibility to content moderation while at Twitter, so these are questions that need to be answered in full by Twitter because we can't expect Mudge to respond to them. Unfortunately, this committee will not be able to get answers about content moderation because Twitter's CEO has refused to appear today. He rejected this committee's invitation to appear by claiming that it would jeopardize Twitter's ongoing litigations with Mr. Musk. Many of the allegations directly implicate Mr. Agrawal's, and he should be here to address them. So let me be very clear. The business of this committee and protecting Americans from foreign influence is more important than Twitter's civil litigation in Delaware. In conclusion, if these allegations are true, I don't see how Mr. Agrawal can maintain his position at Twitter. Going forward, Chairman Durbin and I will continue to conduct a thorough and in-depth investigation. Today's hearing is a part of that process. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. Mr. Zatko, you will have 6 minutes for an opening statement, and then each member will be given 6 minutes of questioning to follow up. We start with the customary oath, and I ask that you please stand for that purpose. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative, and now I appreciate your attendance here, and the floor is yours. I think your microphone may need...
There you go. Thank you very much, sir. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee, I appear before you today to answer questions about information I submitted in written disclosures about cybersecurity concerns I observed while working at Twitter. My name is Peter Zatko, but I'm more often referred to by my online handle as Mudge. For 30 years, my mission has been to make the world better by making it more secure. From November 2020 until January 2022, I was a member of Twitter's executive team. In my role, I was responsible for information security, privacy engineering, physical security, information technology, and Twitter global support. I'm here today because Twitter leadership is misleading the public, lawmakers, regulators, and even its own board of directors. What I discovered when I joined Twitter was that this enormously influential company was over a decade behind industry security standards. The company's cybersecurity failures make it vulnerable to exploitation, causing real harm to real people. And when an influential media platform can be compromised by teenagers, thieves, and spies, and the company repeatedly creates security problems on their own, this is a big deal for all of us. When I brought concrete evidence of these fundamental problems to the executive team and repeatedly sounded the alarm of the real risks associated with them, and these were problems brought to me by the engineers and employees of the company themselves, the executive team chose instead to mislead its board, shareholders, lawmakers, and the public instead of addressing them. This leads to two obvious questions. Why did they do that? And what were the problems and vulnerabilities identified? And that's what I'm here to talk about. So first, why did they do that? To put it bluntly, Twitter leadership ignored its engineers because key parts of leadership lacked the competency to understand the scope of the problem, but more importantly, their executive incentives led them to prioritize profits over security. Upton Sinclair famously said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." This mentality is exactly what I saw at the executive level at Twitter. So what are the problems I discovered? Two basic issues. First, they don't know what data they have, where it lives, or where it came from, and so, unsurprisingly, they can't protect it. And this leads to the second problem, which is the employees then have to have too much access to too much data and to too many systems. You can think of it this way, which is it doesn't matter who has keys if you don't have any locks on the doors. And this kind of vulnerability is not in the abstract. It's not far-fetched to say that an employee inside the company could take over the accounts of all of the senators in this room. Given the real harm to users and national security, I determined it was necessary to take on the personal and professional risk to myself and to my family of becoming a whistleblower. I did not make my whistleblower disclosures out of spite or to harm Twitter. Far from that, I continue to believe in the mission of the company and root for its success. But that success can only happen if the privacy and security of Twitter's users and the public are protected. In accepting an executive position at Twitter, I made a personal commitment to Mr. Dorsey, the board, the greater public, and myself that I would drive the changes needed at Twitter to protect the users, the platform, and democracy. That's what I'm continuing to do here today. I stand by the statements I made in my lawful disclosures, and I am here to answer any questions you may have about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zatko. I'll start the questioning, and as I mentioned, each member will have 6 minutes to ask you questions. Those of us who are not expert but rely on the internet every day for personal, professional reasons know that many times we are given disclosures, lengthy disclosures that scroll across the screen which are hardly ever read, in my estimation, and usually end up with a bottom box that said approve. And that is as far as we go, a warning about what we're getting into. Can we get into the real world now and talk about whether or not consumers across America have a right to be warned if they're opening or using a Twitter account as to what's going to happen with their data? For example, if I disclose my name and my address and my email address, I expect that that may be vulnerable. Somebody could use that in some future time. You hope not, but it could happen. But what I infer from your testimony and what we've read about your findings is there's a lot more information being collected by Twitter beyond that basic information that is going to be used by them for different purposes. Is that a fact?
Yes, I entirely concur. I mean, when we sign up for an account, I hope that the company is being responsible and not just saying that they are, would like the data to be used correctly and safely, but that they're actually able to quantifiably, internally, guarantee that that is the case. As far as the type of data, I believe Senator Grassley, referred to an incident. We had a user on Twitter that was harassing some members of the executive team and some members of the board. And as an example, this person, the CTO, came to me and said, Mudge, is this a real viable threat? Do I need to be worried? Who is this person? And it took me maybe 30 minutes to reach out to an employee and say, what do we know about this person? And then it only took that person maybe 10 minutes to get back to me and said, okay, here's who they are. This is the address where they live. This is where they are physically at this moment. They're on their phone. We know their phone number. We also know all of the other accounts that they've tried to set up on the system and hide. And we know who they are on the other social media platforms as well.
So unbeknownst to a Twitter account user, there's access to information far beyond what you think you've disclosed that can be found. Should there be a warning? You say at one point Twitter has about 20% of its vast trove of data registered and managed, meaning the company is incapable of securing the sensitive information it collects. Tell me, that is a pretty stark statement and suggests that a warning to users is that literally anything that you disclose or use the account for is traceable and could be used for bad purpose.
Yes, in this case, my concern was more that Twitter didn't even know what it was collecting. And this was one of the problems because I kept looking at why do they keep having so many security incidents, the same amount, each year after year? Why are the same percentages, from the same systemic problems? Why aren't we closing on this? What is fundamentally under the hood broken? Where is the systemic failure? And then it turned out from an internal study that the engineers did on their own because they weren't given, the cover and the time and the resources to do this as part of their job, that only about 20% of the information that they had, that they were collecting, did they know why they got it, why the person had given it to them, how it was supposed to be used, when it was supposed to be deleted, and that the remaining, I think it was 80%, I refer you to the disclosures for the specific numbers, was, hey, we know that our systems are using some of this other data, but we don't know what it is. And then a lot of the data, they just recognized, we don't even know what these are. Petabytes, huge amounts of data. And they did a sampling, and that included personally identifying information, phone numbers, addresses. So for me, the concern there is anybody with access inside Twitter, and half the company has access to the production environment that has this, could go rooting through and find this information and use it for their own purposes.
So if 80% of the data that is being collected is in fact registered, or not registered and managed, and the one with the Twitter account person is vulnerable in that regard, I wouldn't exactly give a passing grade to Twitter when it comes to the security of information that they've gathered. Now let me ask you on the other side of the ledger. Would you grade as well the government agencies that have some responsibility to make sure that the American consumer's privacy and security is protected? For example, the Federal Trade Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission, and others.
So that was something that that came to mind as well. I said, we've had a 2011 consent decree. This is over a decade. How have we been passing this? Especially since there were at least 2 more times where there were violations for the exact same problem, the misuse of email data that was collected for security purposes, but then turned around and used for marketing, which was a violation of the assumption of why you were providing them the data. How come we keep making these same mistakes? What is the FTC missing, or what is it that we are telling the FTC as Twitter that is incorrect? And I think honestly, the FTC is a little, over their head. They've compared to the size of the big tech companies and the challenge they have against them, they're left letting companies grade their own homework. And I think that's one of the big challenges.
I'm running out of time, and I'll just say that I think that the area of great concern as well is the access of foreign governments and foreign agencies to the same data. Americans signing up for Twitter have no idea that they are at least vulnerable to that possibility, and we know that the conviction of individuals in Saudi Arabia or for dealing with the Saudi government is proof positive of that possibility. Thank you very much. Senator Grassley?
Yeah, I'm going to take off where the chairman just left off. The communist Chinese government bans Twitter, yet companies based in China advertise on the platform. When a user clicks on such an advertisement, they've presumably redirected to a website controlled by the Chinese government, which can collect vast amounts of data and track their location. With respect to pro-democracy Chinese citizens, is Twitter endangering their lives by allowing China to advertise on the platform?
I think that's a very valid concern, sir. And that was a concern that was raised to me by the employees inside Twitter, who were disturbed that in a country where the service was not allowed to be used and provide the a voice to the public, but that money was being accepted from organizations that may or may not be associated with the Chinese government. And I believe there was a Reuters article just a day or so ago saying that they did identify that there were governments related to China advertising on the platform, possibly in violation of Twitter's own policies. The executive in charge of sales very shortly after I joined said, Mudge, this is a big internal conundrum because we're making too much money from these sales. We're not going to stop. We need something that will make the employees more comfortable with the fact that we're doing this. Figure out how we essentially thread this needle or frame it, which made me a bit uncomfortable. And they didn't know what people they were putting at risk or what information they were even giving to the government, which made me concerned that they hadn't thought through the problem in the first place that they were putting their users at risk for. And that was a very common problem, where I saw that Twitter was a company that was managed by risk and by crises instead of one that manages risk and crises. It was very it would react to problems too late.
I think you just answered this question, but I want to ask it and see if you've said all you want to on the subject. While at Twitter, you raised concerns with their policy allowing Chinese advertisement. What was Twitter's response?
In a nutshell, it was, we're already in bed. It would be problematic if we lost that revenue stream. So figure out a way to make people comfortable with it.
Okay. According to your disclosure, thousands of Twitter employees have access to Twitter user data and internal systems. That includes nearly 4,000 engineers, which is half of Twitter's workforce. However, you've stated that they don't need that kind of widespread access to perform their job duties. Based on Twitter's reported lack of data security, what kind of access would foreign agents have, and what kind of data would they be able to obtain? In your answer, please explain why this is a problem and how it could impact U.S. national security.
Yes, sir. Let me break that down into two parts of an answer. So Twitter has engineers and non-engineers. Twitter does not have, at least when I was there, which was up until January of 2022, does not have a testing environment or a development or staging environment. This is an oddity. This is an exception to the norm. Most companies will have a place where you test your software, where you build it, where you make sure it's working the way you want it to. Think about somebody building an airplane and saying, like, I'm going to put it in a wind tunnel. I'm going to build it in an environment. I'm not going to put passengers on it, put it in the air, and then figure out how to build it or tweak the engines at that point. Twitter just has the production environment, the running systems, the live data. When you become an engineer, which is half of the company are engineers, you are by default given some access to this live production environment. You are doing your testing, you are doing your work on live systems and live data, irrespective of where you are in the world as an engineer. So if you are a foreign agent and you are hired and you are an engineer, you've got access to all of that data that we talked about. The 80% that Twitter doesn't know what's in, yet the engineers studied and realized is personally identifying information, other sensitive information, where there's a lack of access controls because they have too much data and they just didn't know where everything is, so they have to give everybody access and the systems can access the information. But also recall that foreign agents can have multiple goals. And sometimes it's not just the engineers or the technical access that they want, but it might be information about the plans of Twitter, what plans Twitter has to potentially censor information in a government or concede to a government's request, or what plans they have for expansion in a particular environment. And in those cases, that's where I saw with high confidence a foreign agent placed from India to understand the negotiations and how well they were going for or against India's party, who was having difficulties with Twitter in India.
In your disclosure, you mentioned that the FBI notified Twitter that one of their employees was suspected of being a Chinese foreign asset. Were you and others at Twitter at all surprised by that?
This had recognizing the state of the environment at Twitter. We're really thinking if you are not placing foreign agents inside Twitter, because it's very difficult to detect them, it is very valuable to a foreign agent to be inside there. As a foreign intelligence company, you're most likely not doing your job.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. On August 10, 2022, a federal jury convicted a former Twitter employee of acting as an unregistered foreign agent for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. While employed by Twitter, the individual accepted payments in exchange for accessing and conveying the private information of Twitter users to Saudi officials. That individual is one of two former Twitter employees charged by the Department of Justice for their efforts to provide Saudi officials with the personal information of dissidents and activists critical of the Saudi regime, including sensitive data that could identify and locate these individual users. Now the question, as head of security, Mr. Zatko, can you describe the types of efforts you've seen by foreign governments to infiltrate, control, exploit, or surveil Twitter and its users, and share what steps Twitter and regulators should have taken to protect against these attacks?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
One of the disturbing things that I saw, based upon being 10 years behind where I would expect a modern tech company to be, was a lack of an ability to internally look for and identify inappropriate access within their own systems. Other than the person who I believe with high confidence to be a foreign agent placed in a position from India, and from it was only going to be from an outside agency or somebody alerting Twitter that somebody already existed, that they would find the person. What I did notice when we did know of a person inside acting on behalf of a foreign interest as an unregistered agent, it was extremely difficult to track the people. There was a lack of logging and an ability to see what they were doing, what information was being accessed, or to contain their activities, let alone set steps for remediation and possible reconstitution of any damage. They simply lacked the fundamental abilities to hunt for foreign intelligence agencies and expel them on their own.
You said it was difficult to track. Explain exactly what you mean about that, what you mean, and secondly, what could be done to correct that?
One of the most senior engineers in the company came to me not long after I was there and said, "Mudge, you should know that this company doesn't really have centralized logging. We don't log the activities of the systems." I was surprised by this. Most tech companies, most companies I know of, even not in tech, have logs about what's happening on their systems. And this tells you who tried to log in, who was doing what, where, when it happened. Later on in my tenure, I learned that there were thousands of failed attempts to access internal systems that were happening per week, and nobody was noticing. And when we brought this up, people said, well, who is it? What is it? And I said, that's what we're trying to find out. Why weren't we even being aware of this? This fundamental lack of logging inside Twitter is, a remnant of being so far behind on their infrastructure and the engineering, and the engineers not being given the ability to put things in place to modernize. I can give an example. Let's suppose you have 5 credit cards and you're receiving statements each month, but only 2 of those statements give you detailed transactions, and you want to see if there's fraud on your credit cards. Well, first off, 3 of those credit cards, you're not going to be able to look at the transactions. You just know the total bill. And those remaining 2, you don't have time to go through the transactions and look for it. So You kind of wing it and say, I need all those credit cards to stay alive, so you just keep paying off the bills. That's kind of the analogy I have for the production environment and the logging situation at Twitter. So you can understand that trying to understand what an adversary inside identified is doing can be pretty challenging without logs.
Have you thought about how one would design legislation which would maintain some basic necessary rights and yet cover this area?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the regulators because, of course, I was very curious as to, how was Twitter still operating like this since there was a 2011 consent decree that was aimed at addressing a fair amount of this. I noticed a few things. One, there were a lot of evaluations and examinations which were interview questions. So essentially the organization was allowed to grade their own homework. Did you make things better? Yes, we did. Okay, check. There wasn't a lot of ground truth. There wasn't a lot of quantified measurements. And a fair amount of the interviews came from companies, auditors, that Twitter themselves were able to hire. So I think that's a little bit of a maybe conflict of interest. I also noticed that of all of the regulators, some of the foreign regulators were much more feared than the FTC. For instance, the French CNIL, the CNIL, the French version of the FTC, terrified Twitter in comparison to the FTC. And when I looked at why, it was because there was more of the fear that it wouldn't be a one-time fine. One-time fines were priced in. One-time fines didn't bother Twitter at all. I saw the recent amount of the fine that was much less than we had been concerned about. And each time it was a one-time fine, in my discussions with the chief privacy officer, with the privacy engineer head, that was and the executives, the thought was, okay, we'll pay that and we can keep kicking the can down the road and hope, maybe we'll get another one-time fine. Wall Street didn't seem to care because it wasn't a long-term problem that was ongoing. What did make these companies afraid was if there was a risk of, hey, you've mishandled the same type of data repeatedly. Maybe we're not going to let you monetize that type of data.
Who mishandled the data?
Oh, so if Twitter, for example, Twitter mishandled email addresses repeatedly. And a concern was if the FTC were to come in and tell us that we're not allowed to monetize email addresses because of our continued inability to handle them correctly, well, then we might not be on fair footings with our competitors, and that scared them and made them move. I believe something like that did happen to Facebook, which has been used as a sort of cautionary tale inside organizations. So I think the regulators have tools that do work, but they're not able to see which tools in their tool belt are the ones actually working, and they're using the one-time fines that the companies aren't really afraid of.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zatko, thanks for being here. Disclosures include information that Twitter's head of privacy engineering and chief privacy officer reported the following to the board of directors toward the end of 2021. This is a quote. Every new employee has access to data they do not need to have access to for the purpose of their role. And also added that until Twitter could reach the point where it could implement a system to manage access to data, they were, quote, at risk of inappropriate access or use of data. They also reported that our inability to delete data compounds that risk, as we retain data that we should not have and which is therefore accessible by people who do not need to have access to this data. Tell me, Mr. Zatko, what action was taken by Twitter's board of directors in response to this rather shocking information?
This is not the first time the board of directors had been made aware of that or told this, and there was no change or mandate or charge put forward by the board of the directors.
What do they mean by when they refer to the inability to delete data? Why is that significant?
If you don't know where your data is, as we talked about, these large amounts of data, and somebody comes in and says, I've left the system, and maybe the FTC asks, well, have you deleted all the user data? you can't respond in the affirmative because...
Even if you've deleted the account.
Correct, because you don't know where else this data lives in systems, because you don't know what data you have and where it is. That's correct.
So does this mean that Twitter is actually unable to delete data, or is it just unwilling?
It is unable because they do not know where it is, so they are unable to comply.
Okay. So but this has resulted from a deliberate decision at some point to adopt protocols that don't allow them to do that, right?
To choose other priorities rather than to correctly register and track and understand where their data live.
Because it is physically possible. I mean, you could have a database in which you could track that.
Absolutely. If you knew where everything was in your database, you could go delete it. If you chose to make that a priority, to make sure that the new data coming in was correctly registered and to go back and figure out what data you have and where it is, you could absolutely go delete it. But that hasn't been prioritized over other projects such as increasing revenue or users.
Now, I'm concerned, as I assume most or all Americans would be, those who become aware of these concerns, that Twitter has seemingly turned a blind eye, rather deliberately, to some pretty significant security risks, potentially compromising their own personal data, including geolocation information, both to hackers and to foreign government agents and to other people who, for whatever reason, whether for corporate espionage purposes, for other commercial purposes or otherwise, might want to gain access to this information. Based on your disclosures, it seems to me that Twitter's CEO is more concerned with increasing influence and profits from foreign countries than with protecting user data from foreign spies or hackers. Now, you claim that Twitter has hired foreign government agents at the cost of doing, as sort of the cost of doing business in countries like India, Nigeria, and China. And as you've related, Twitter has knowingly hired these government spies so as to not risk losing access to users and markets in those countries, or in the case of China, to not lose access to advertising revenues. Do these engineers who are suspected of being foreign agents, do they have access to all user data or just a certain subset of the user data?
To be very specific, the Indian incident was not an engineer, and as I mentioned to the other senator, I think that was put in place more to understand Twitter's intent in negotiations with the court and the Ministry of India before Twitter, to have an inside information to understand.
But he worked with other people who were themselves engineers.
Yes, sir.
Had access to them.
Yes, sir. There were numerous engineers in the Indian office. I'm sorry, I focused on that and I lost the other part of your question.
So let me ask you this. Is there any way to track what data they access or the data that they share?
We found that to be very difficult. We had to set up a specific small team individually to try and create a unique environment just to allow us to track and monitor and log one individual because of the lack of general logging and access control that we found would be unscalable and not reproducible should there be any other people like that. It was a lack of basic fundamental tools and access control.
Okay, so I'm almost out of time, but I need to know this. Why would Twitter not create a tracking or a logging system to follow this sort of thing, to make sure that it was handled correctly, particularly given that they know that many foreign governments, like India and Nigeria and China, specifically want to access and use that data to find and root out and punish dissidents? Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to subject their own users to this kind of harm with the grave implications that it carries, especially in those countries?
I think they would like to, but they're simply unwilling to put the effort in at the cost of other efforts such as driving revenue. I'm reminded of one conversation with an executive when I said, I am confident that we have a foreign agent, and their response was, well, since we already have one, what does it matter if we have more? Let's keep growing the office.
Right. Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zacko. Following up on that point, I just returned from Ukraine, where Senator Portman and I saw firsthand the extent of the damage inflicted by the Russian invasion. I was troubled to learn that, according to your written disclosures, Twitter's leadership recently considered agreeing to the Putin regime's request to censor and surveil Russian Twitter users. Twitter ultimately did not agree to Putin's request, as far as I understand. What can you tell us about requests made by foreign governments and the risks that those demands pose? And why would a company like Twitter consider agreeing to a request to censor or surveil users?
I was very surprised and shocked by that one-on-one conversation which I had with Mr. Agrawal. This was prior to his assuming the CEO role. I understand it out of a frustration of the inability to perform, and this kind of goes into content moderation, which we talked about before, and while that wasn't my main ballywick, and I've been informed I shouldn't go into details about conversations I've had with Twitter counsel, there was we don't really have the ability and tools to do things correctly. This is a lot of work. It's not, driving our main executive incentive goals. Is there a way that we can simply punt? And since they have elections, doesn't that make them a democracy?
Thank you. I am a big believer that these companies, and not just Twitter, have to invest more in protecting data and protecting the public. And I heard Senator Durbin talk to you about the agencies, right? And you, I think, agree with me that the agencies in the U.S. are underfunded when it comes to taking on these major cases. But I want to turn to ourselves and put the mirror back on ourselves here in Congress. Do you think it would be helpful if we pass some privacy legislation in Congress?
I think one thing that would be very helpful is that the FTC and other regulators don't have laws or rules that would create whistleblower protection programs for people while they were still in these organizations. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, I learned a lot of information. A lot of people wanted to share the information. When I came on board, they were excited that there was an executive that was listening and that was willing to ruffle feathers, that was willing to fight for some of these things because they had tried to raise them.
Yeah, I
think,
understand.
yes.
Okay. Are you aware that Senator Grassley and I actually passed a bill to change the merger fees that passed through this committee unanimously, passed through the Senate? It's now sitting somewhere in purgatory over in the House, that would allow us to fund the FTC. So maybe they would be as scary as France or some other country, and that we have been unable to pass that, or actually, despite this probably being our 50th hearing between, I'm looking at Senator Blackburn, between Commerce and Judiciary, we have not passed one bill out of the U.S. Senate when it comes to competition, when it comes to privacy, when it comes to better funding the agencies, when it comes to the protection of kids that Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn have worked on. And so at some point, when we talk about the agencies, I think we better be putting the mirror on ourselves. Because I was listening to your quote from Sinclair Lewis, a Minnesotan. It is difficult to get someone to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Could you talk about the lack of action in Congress and how that has actually created an environment where these companies feel like they can do everything from destroying our newspapers and our public good to basically not taking correct actions when it comes to hacking?
So that's your world, not mine. I appreciate the efforts and the work that you're doing. What I did see is that any laws or bills passed or actions in the past, if they are not able to be quantified and externally audited by an independent viewer, get gamed a lot by what I saw inside big tech in their ability to sort of answer in an affirmative without actually doing what the intention was of the rule, law, or regulation.
Mm-hmm. One other bill I want to mention, and Senator teamed up here with Senator Coons and Portman on this, Platform Accountability and Transparency Act to require digital platforms to give researchers access to data. And the independent experts that you hired to audit Twitter's processes for addressing disinformation found serious problems, made recommendations. However, I think Twitter's leadership didn't listen. In your view, why do you think Twitter failed to act on the recommendations made related to the disinformation? And how could independent groups help?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of independent groups having independent eyes and providing ground truth on that. I think this is, I should be clear, first off, the engineers and the employees want this change. The culture, and I can speak primarily about Twitter because that's what I'm here to talk about in the most recent big tech company I've been involved with. It's a culture where they don't prioritize. They're only able to focus on one crisis at a time. And that crisis isn't completed, it's simply replaced by another crisis. Correct. So I think they would like to wave a magic wand and have all of these things fixed, but they're unwilling to bite the bullet and look strategically and say, hey, we're gonna have to devote some time and money to get these basic things in place and to be honest with their investors, the public, their board, themselves, and do the legwork rather than just react to what's coming in that they hear from a hearing like this or from the news just until the next crisis comes along.
As opposed to us putting some long-term rules in place. Last thing, you talked about in your disclosures that Twitter does not have enough resources focused on removing misinformation and hate speech. In particular, you noted that half of the content flagged for review in Twitter Spaces features was in a language that employees didn't even speak. Obviously, you can't check whether a tweet violates Twitter's rules if you don't speak the language. I have had my own experience directly conveying a misinformation that was put out on me that resulted in an attack on a member of my family. And I don't know if you knew that because I told Jack Dorsey about it. And nothing ever changed, except when finally regular media reported that it was a lie. But those are the kinds of things that happen to people in this building because of the misinformation that is rampant on social media. Could you comment about what you think they should be doing about that?
I'm very sorry to hear about that. The lack of language was stunning to me. This was a situation where I brought in a world-class leader for Twitter Global Support who also identified this. And we started saying, you can't react to a language situation. When something was happening in Myanmar, you can't wait until after it happens and then go, where are the Burmese speakers? Let's see who we can hire. Those translators are already hired elsewhere. You have to understand, 80% of Twitter has to understand, 80% of their users are outside of the United States. You can't create a healthy environment. You can't serve the public conversation if all you can do is look at it and say, I hope Google Translate's doing the right job for me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zatko, give me 30 seconds. Well, strike that. Senator Grassley is an active user on Twitter. I'll use him as an example. Give me 30 seconds on the type of information Twitter has on Senator Grassley, or someone like it.
If I was, if there was somebody, just like what the CTO came to me and said, hey, we've got a problem with this user. Is this user...
Just give me 30 seconds on the type of information
Sure.
Twitter has on the average Twitter user.
Sure. What's the phone number? What's the latest IP address they've connected from? Are there other IP address they've connected from? Is this the current email? How long have they been using that email with the account? What are the prior emails for it? From the IP address, there's a where do we think they live? Where do we think they're connected to right now? Are they still connected even if they're not actively using the information? What type of device are they connected with? What type of web browser are they using? Which brand is it? Possibly which computer? What language did they connect in it? Those are at some of the front-end systems.
Thank you for that. And I want to be sure I understand. You're telling this committee that all of the engineers and half the employees of Twitter have access to Senator Grassley's account?
Half of the employees of Twitter are engineers. The engineers are by default given some access to the production environment. If it is, from what I saw, if they wanted to root around in the data and find it, they could find it.
Okay,
and
let me try
I believe
that
some
again.
have.
I'm going to be sure I understand. Okay, I'm not trying to trick you. From your testimony, I understand that half of all of the engineers and half of the employees at Twitter have access to Senator Grassley's account. Is that correct?
Based upon what I saw, technically, yes.
And if they go into Senator Grassley's account, if an engineer does, for example, Twitter doesn't know that that engineer has done that. Is that correct?
It would be difficult to find the logs showing that, is my understanding correct.
Okay. So you don't have a log in and log out system?
There was not an easy ability for me to find which engineers had logged into which systems and what data that they had accessed.
Okay. So this engineer who can secretly go into Senator Grassley's account and get all this information, Twitter has no idea what the hell that engineer is going to do with that information, does it?
Under the hood, no.
Okay. So that engineer at Twitter could sell it, for example, couldn't he?
I'm sorry, could what?
Could sell it.
Could sell access. I've seen numerous accounts on underground forums offering to sell such access, whether those are valid or not, but I've seen the offers to sell access to accounts, to delete accounts, to unban accounts.
Or that engineer could just call one of his buddies and say, hey, you don't like Senator Grassley. Let me give you some information here, and you may want to use it against him. Could that engineer do that?
With the access they have.
Would Twitter know that the engineer had done that?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Now, did Mr. Dorsey know all this?
I did explain this to Mr. Dorsey. My understanding is he did not understand this prior to bringing me in, and that was one of the reasons that he
Does he understand it now?
I believe after seeing
How
this
about
hearing.
your CEO? Does he understand this?
I believe since he has been there for 10 years and rose up through the ranks in engineering, and he has talked to the engineers, and they have told him.
Yes.
I believe yes. I believe
How
yes.
about Mr. Brett Taylor from Salesforce? He's the chairman of your board. Does he know all this?
He knows what I put in my reports. I do not know whether he understands it.
All right, you've got an executive from MasterCard, Mimi. I'm gonna probably mispronounce the last name. Ali Mayu from MasterCard. Does this board member know that?
I do not know if she knows that.
Hier ist Opera GX, der erste für Gamer entwickelte Browser.
I would think so, but I've also seen that what was presented to the board was not representative.
During your time there, did the board ever ask?
The board did not ask these directly.
Even after all these problems with foreign agents?
Not when I was there during the board meetings.
They just sat there?
They focused on other topics and other priorities.
Right. Dr. Lee, he's a professor at Stanford. Does he know all this?
Same response. I did not see any questions on this specific topic while I was there.
Patrick Pichette, who used to be with Google.
Same response, sir.
All right.
Oh, Patrick Pichette? Sorry.
Pichette.
Yeah, Patrick Pichette was the one who, when I brought up this instance, he hit the roof. He was very upset.
Did he fix it?
No, he asked for follow-on information.
And why hadn't Twitter fixed this?
There were other priorities.
It's about the money, isn't it?
It's about whatever crisis and the other priorities.
To fix this would cost them money, wouldn't it?
It would take away focus on other projects.
It'd cost them money, wouldn't it?
Most likely, yes.
Yeah. Okay, Twitter for a while was going to go into the porn business. Did they do that?
I don't know that they did that. I didn't know they were going to go into the porn business.
Oh, okay. Well, they were. You don't know why they decided not to?
I do know that there were discussions about content, about age-related information, and the discussions internally that I heard were simply concerns about lack of tools to correctly regulate or constrain it.
So it wasn't a moral issue. It was Why didn't they go in the porn business?
I do not know.
Okay. Sounded like you knew a little bit about it. Last question, I'll ask you quickly, Mr. Chairman. Who sets the standards for censorship at Twitter?
I believe that comes out of council.
Your lawyer?
I believe so, sir.
And do they talk with the board about it?
I have been advised out of an abundance of caution that I shouldn't comment on any Twitter council conversations for AC Priv that Twitter might assert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Brewer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and Senator Grassley for holding this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Zacko, for your being here. Your extraordinarily insightful and significant testimony here today at substantial professional and personal risk, which is the tradition of whistleblowers, and your cooperation with me and my staff off the record in providing details that are important to our understanding, and the more of it that's made public, I think, the better. Would you agree with me that Twitter has put its users' health and safety severely at risk?
Yes, sir.
And it's put the national security severely at risk?
Yes, sir. That's
its management has misled its own board of directors?
Yes, sir.
And in that event, the management ought to be certainly restructured, shifted, changed, correct?
Yes, sir.
That kind of structural reform is necessary to achieve changes within the company.
That is my belief.
You've also said that this company has misrepresented facts to government agencies, most especially the FTC. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, that is correct, sir.
And I think you shared in your complaint that Twitter management was intending to mislead as well French and Irish regulators about compliance with the consent decree, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
How high in the Twitter management would you say that intent to mislead and in effect deceive government agencies went?
To the CEO, I do not know to what level inside the board. They did not know because of misrepresentation or chose not to push.
The misleading of government agencies is one of the reasons why stronger action hasn't been taken.
That could very well be, sir.
But it also, in effect, is the result of a lack of vigor in law enforcement, whether because of inadequate resources or a failure of will.
That could be as well, sir.
In fact, the most recent settlement with Twitter, which was a payment of $150 million earlier this year, the FTC and Department of Justice stated that Twitter violated the 2011 consent decree. That's no surprise. But the size of the penalty, a mere $150 million, amounts to the kind of burden on us average drivers when we pay the toll to go into Manhattan, given that its profit in the second quarter of this year was about $1.18 billion, correct?
That is correct. While I was there, the concern only really was about a significantly higher amount, significantly higher, or if it would have been a more institutional restructuring risk. But that amount would have been of very little concern while I was there.
To effectively address this problem, we need not only to insist on restructuring the company, but also likely restructuring, reforming, and energizing our regulatory apparatus, not only as to Twitter, but also as to other internet companies and platforms. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. The intent of the regulators, I think, is the right intent, but it is not being followed or correctly adhered to.
All of what you're saying, everything in your complaint, and a lot of what we've heard in this committee and in other committees leads me to think we need a new agency. As reluctant as I am to suggest a new government bureaucracy, I don't think it needs to be a government bureaucracy with a lot of new people, but it needs to be a new means of enforcement here to bring cases to the Department of Justice, focusing on privacy, security, and protecting users as well as our national security. Would you agree?
I had not considered that. I will have to think about that. It's a very interesting approach.
I'm not reaching any conclusions, but clearly what we're doing right now is not working. You agree with that?
Yes, what I have seen, the tools that are used out of the tool belt are not working. I do believe other tools in the tool belt do work, but the regulators aren't able to quantify and get measurements that would show them to switch to the other tools they have.
What are the remedies that, for example, other countries have that enable them to better protect privacy?
Some are simply much more aggressive and do not accept answers at face value, put very strict time constraints on requiring answers, require data to back up the answers, and threaten to preclude monetizing entire markets, such as maybe you won't be allowed to monetize in France, or maybe you won't be allowed to use a particular data source in France, and you have a week to respond sort of approach.
And let me just finish on that note, to expand on the Upton Sinclair theory of the case here. Essentially, users and their information are Twitter's product. They are the means to monetize the eyeballs on the site, to collect, use, and monetize that information is the Twitter business. And so their reckless disregard for their users' health and safety and for the national security is a product of that incentive. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. And that's why I understand the M and MDAO to be monetizable daily average users.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for joining us today. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I want to talk with you about this process Twitter has gone through. They tried to start a new subscription-based adult entertainment section. Are you familiar with that?
No, ma'am, I'm not.
You're not, okay. Well, they had to scrap the plans because an internal team found that they had too much child and non-consensual pornography that was on their site already. Are you aware of that?
No, ma'am, unfortunately, it does not surprise me.
Okay. Well, there's a federal court case right now against Twitter because the site repeatedly refused to take down tweets of children as young as 13 and 14 performing sex acts in photographs and in videos. And these were posted by sex traffickers who were impersonating a teenage female. So, my question is, why? For what reason would Twitter refuse to take down this sexually explicit content if it knew that it was affecting underage children? Why would they leave this up? And why would they refuse to take this down?
From what I saw, and on the area of adult content, because that was brought up, and the concern was certain advertisers didn't want adult content to appear next to ads they were putting, and that was a concern inside the company. The lack of ability.
They had a monetary concern, but not a moral concern.
There was a, I can't speak to the morals of the people internally, but there was a concern whether or not they could even correctly identify and get ahead of this because they lacked the basic tools and the resources in those teams, and it would have to be in a reaction after things were posted and maybe brought to their attention.
So what do they do to police this sexually explicit material, especially when it pertains to children?
Unfortunately, that was not under my area, so I don't have information to talk specifically to that.
So there's not a standard operating procedure to block this, to pull it down?
I believe they do have, or I was told that they have some voluntary self-tagging and self-reporting of whether you're an adult content account, but I am not aware of the other processes or procedures in the company.
Let me ask you about the FTC. Senator Blumenthal was just asking you about that. Did you ever participate in calls or meetings with the FTC in which you heard specific misrepresentations made by Twitter?
No, ma'am, I was not in the calls.
Okay,
I got
so you had no
briefings.
direct knowledge.
Well, I got direct briefings from the people who were in the calls telling me what they did.
All right, so it was all secondhand.
Correct, from the people involved in the calls.
Okay. Did the FTC come to Twitter and identify specific conduct or representations that concern them?
That would be a question that you'd have to ask the Chief Privacy Officer, who would have been the recipient of those outreach.
Okay. Let me ask you about the issue of click-through ads, because I know that many times our adversaries will, through a company in China and specifically, the CCP will be part owner of a company. So they use click-through ads to gain access to platform user data, including China, including other adversaries, and including places where Twitter is blocked. And they're finding ways to evade the tracking and to get into these networks. In your experience, is this a typical practice that happens at the global tech platforms?
Click-through ads do expose a risk that non-click-through ads do not. If you can get a user to click through, you get the information that I was describing before. The IP address, the browser. From the IP address, you can determine the IP geolocation or whether they're using a VPN or not, if that is allowed in your country. And then you can further interrogate that person's computer or get them to provide more information, maybe that they don't know they're providing directly to you, thinking it's through an ad on the service.
Could this be remedied in any way? And Senator Klobuchar talked to you about this, a national privacy standard. If we had a national privacy standard, would that help to secure an individual's information online, and would it help in any way in policing these click-through ads?
I think addressing in general the difference of the information or making people aware, and then providing a context around when a user knows that they are providing information and what information they are providing, no longer to the service they thought they were interacting with, could definitely benefit a user.
I want to ask you one thing about censorship. And during your time at Twitter, did you participate in any conversations or meetings where content moderation decisions were made based on a poster's political views?
I never investigated or was or heard of decisions on that particular topic. I was focused on the crisis and fires in the areas of my domain.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley. Thank you, Mr. Zacko. Thank you much for coming forward. This is yet another eye-opening moment for our public, for our nation, and for this committee. We know that social media and new communications technologies have empowered people across the world to connect and share information at an unprecedented scale, but we also know that concentrating all this information, all these resources in just a few hands comes with great risks. So your whistleblower complaint contains really striking allegations which shed light on several key realities, and I wanted to focus on those. The first, as you've stated in a number of exchanges with my colleagues, is that the public lacks any credible way to assess whether and how major platforms and technology companies are protecting or prioritizing user privacy. And I want to talk for a bit about a bill that I've got that Senator Klobuchar also mentioned that would
help strengthen some of that transparency. And then the second, which I'll get to later, is that these platforms are a target for foreign actors, something where a subcommittee I chair is having a dedicated hearing tomorrow afternoon. You commissioned an independent report regarding Twitter's platform integrity and their ability to combat misinformation, disinformation. And that report found, and I'm quoting, Twitter's consistently behind the curve in acting against disinformation and misinformation threats. And that Twitter doesn't have the ability to measure the impact of its work to protect site integrity. What I've concluded from your testimony today is that Twitter lacked the ability to measure the effects of interventions it implemented because of decisions by management and because of the lack of a credible regulatory oversight agency and penalties. Is that correct? Do I understand your testimony correctly?
Yes, sir. The inability internally came from 10 years of security and engineering debt that just kept accruing.
Your complaint also details how Twitter's executive team was concerned that the report that you'd commissioned would be damaging if it got out, and that they worked to intentionally remove or modify information that might be especially embarrassing for Twitter. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I found that very disturbing. The company that I hired, with the knowledge of the other executives and the head of site integrity, which did not report to me, but that this independent organization was going to analyze and do gap analysis. The company reached out to me and said, "Hey, Mudge, Twitter is jumping in and making us open a separate contract and telling us not to provide you the results to your own work, to your own work. This does not feel right to us. What's going on?"
So a lot of the information that both regulators and Congress relies on when considering how to regulate social media companies comes from the companies themselves. As I think you put it before, they're essentially grading their own homework. So the conclusion we ought to reach is the information we receive isn't trustworthy from some social media.
Yes, sir, that's what I experienced.
So I've released a bill with Senator Portman, Senator Klobuchar referenced it earlier. We are looking for additional Republican co-sponsors. It's called the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act. It would allow external researchers to look at exactly these kinds of problems, to better understand and analyze the algorithms that drive social media and some of their practices. Would empowering researchers and mandating better disclosure help hold companies more accountable and cause them to invest more resources in site integrity?
Yes, sir. In fact, I think one of the things that we learned from that study, and what I am hopefully shedding light on in my lawful disclosures, is just how much a gap there is between Twitter and some of Twitter's peers. And even learning that sort of discrepancy would help understand and raise the level of hygiene for these organizations and their ability to perform their tasks, and the ability for us to accept what they're saying as to whether it could possibly be true or not.
This also opens up enormous national security risks. As you testified earlier, there's roughly half of Twitter's employees that had unnecessary access to vast amounts of sensitive user data. As Senator Kennedy was asking you earlier, just give us a quick sense of what information Twitter might have about Senator Grassley or about any of us in this committee. And it is deeper and broader, and I suspect if you'd gone further, it then unlocks a whole profile that can give really dramatic insight into members of law enforcement, members of the military, members of Congress, and their families, their travel, their preferences, their actions, their consumer activities. All of that has some real consequences. You wrote in your complaint the Indian government forced Twitter to hire Indian government agents who then had direct and unsupervised access to data. And a former Twitter employee was convicted last August of working as an agent of the Saudi kingdom. How common do you think it is for foreign entities, for hostile agencies, to successfully install sympathetic actors at Twitter, and why might they do so?
Well, if there's any number of reasons, there are many of reasons why you would do so, in particular to not just identify people of interest or track groups of interest, but also to maybe look at whether or not Twitter has identified your agents or your information operations. What other governments has Twitter possibly identified? And remember, outside of the ability to access large amounts of data on the engineering side, you would want to know what Twitter's plan is as far as whether they will cede to your demands for control of information within their environments or not, in order to change different types of political pressures, such as strong-arming. And as we saw, that country was even threatening to put Twitter employees in jail if Twitter didn't change particular activities on the platform.
With 80% of Twitter's users outside the United States, and with Twitter having a deep access and resources to critical leaders in our country and other countries, I think this is genuinely concerning. Tomorrow afternoon, the subcommittee I chair, the subcommittee on privacy technology and the law, Senator Sass and I will be holding a hearing on how to further understand the depth to which hostile actors and adversaries are going to obtain American citizens' data. And that'll expand on a lot of the topics we've pursued today. I hope members of the committee will attend. I want to thank you for your testimony, Mr. Chairman, for the chance to participate in today's hearing.
Thank you, Senator Coons. We're going to take a 5-minute break after Senator Cotton asks his questions. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Zatko, for your very informative testimony this morning. I want to start with some questions about Twitter's censorship policies. I know you weren't at Twitter for most of 2020, but I want to start with an example from June of 2020, specifically me. As left-wing street militias were rioting and looting in our streets, I posted on the website that the National Guard and even the active duty military have been used to stop such rioting in the past, most recently in 1992 in the LA riots. Within a couple hours, a low-level employee at Twitter's Washington office contacted my staff and said that if I did not delete that tweet, that my account would be permanently locked. My staff worked with this low-level employee, calling her on several occasions because she seemed very reluctant to put anything in writing in an email. They documented the accuracy of my comment and gave examples of how other elected officials had used similar language. 30-minute window passed. My account was not locked. Ultimately, she said that Twitter would not take any action about my account. As I said, I know it was before you began at Twitter, but from your experience, would a low-level Twitter employee typically have the authority to permanently lock the account of an elected member of Congress?
From my experience, they should not have the authorization to do it, although it would probably be a low-level employee that would be instructed to do it.
So she was likely taking direction from more senior officials at the company.
Not knowing the situation, I can't comment on the specific one, but that is the sort of activity that I would see there. And I can concur that I did notice a reluctance to put a lot of things in writing on particular topics.
I noticed that in the emails that Mr. Agarwal sent to you, he seemed very reluctant to put things in writing or made statements about what he was going to verbally express to the board.
Yes.
Apparently did not express those things. Sticking with the censorship, again, like I said, I know you weren't there in the lead up to the 2020 election, but once you arrived just a couple days after the election, you selected an outside company to do an evaluation of Twitter's censorship policies. The report that you commissioned found that Twitter's content controls are ad hoc and informal, those are two direct quotes, and the policy decisions behind it are made mostly by a small group of Twitter staff at San Francisco, quote, frequently during a time of crisis. Is that accurate?
I didn't hire them to do a report on censorship, but that was the platform manipulation organization. And yes, the how you cite the report is what they found on that team is correct.
When it says frequently in a time of crisis, what kind of crisis was the report referring to?
I believe the report also said, and this is from what I experienced, if something was brought up in the media, if a government brought it up, if somehow it became publicly aware, or if there was, an ongoing outage to the system or some active disruption or crisis.
Yeah, thank you for that, because the report does go on to say that according to Twitter employees interviewed, Twitter usually censors information, quote, only if it is flagged by reporters or news headlines, partners, which it means to include academic organizations and other social media companies, or political officials, end quote. So does Twitter have special channels of communication with fellow social media companies like Facebook to discuss so-called misinformation?
If they do, I believe that they would be ad hoc. I am not aware of official ones that would not have been within my organizations.
Okay, what about other so-called partners like pharmaceutical companies or advocacy groups?
I am not aware of those. Again, that would be out of council or other organizations.
So saying ad hoc, you think in these cases, just say a executive at a pharmaceutical company that doesn't like what's being posted on the website, or a left-wing activist at a Washington think tank would just use pre-existing relationships to contact someone at Twitter on an ad hoc basis?
I do not know.
Well, how can they coordinate if they don't have some kind of channel of communication set up?
In the report that was an attachment from the organization, they talked about disinformation operations, which I do believe, my understanding was that the site integrity team spoke with other organizations and with other social media companies about ongoing disinformation or platform manipulation. I do not know anything beyond what was in the report for that topic.
You said something earlier I just wanted to come back to. This isn't an exact quote, but I want to give you a chance to elaborate a little bit. It was something along the lines of, if you don't have a foreign intelligence officer inside Twitter, you probably aren't doing a very good job as an intelligence agency. Is that close enough?
Yeah, that's close enough, sir. I worked for the government. I held a high-level position. I worked running research and development and programs for the Department of Defense and intelligence communities. And from my interactions with these people and these organizations, Twitter would be a goldmine. From my understanding, from people in the community who focus on foreign intelligence organizations and assets, if you placed somebody in Twitter, as I believe that, as we know has happened, it would be very difficult to Twitter to find them. They would probably be able to stay there for a long period of time and gain a significant amount of information to provide back on either targeting people or on information as to Twitter's decisions and discussions and to the direction of the company.
And does that include in Twitter's U.S. offices versus overseas, or is that distinction immaterial given the way Twitter functions?
I believe that's immaterial in both.
Thank you.
My pleasure, sir.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. We're going to take a 5-minute break and return to Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zetko, I just wanted to follow a little bit on the repeated suggestions that you've made in your testimony that the cybersecurity vulnerabilities will expose the United States to risk and to attacks, and that Twitter's security failures threaten the country's national security. Good with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I get hidden ad buyers. We saw the same thing with Facebook when they were taking ads with the payments denominated in rubles and not bothering to figure out that there might have been Russians behind those ads. And you've mentioned concerns about hidden Chinese ad buyers. But if we could talk a little bit more about the national security risk associated with, for instance, the unregistered Saudi foreign agent who worked at Twitter, or the pressure to hire Indian government agents. Walk us through a scenario of how an individual planted in Twitter like that could create a national security risk for the United States, and if you would, make particular reference to the fact that, at least when I use Twitter, I'm sending stuff out. It's intended to be public. So how, in that environment, can a foreign agent create national security risk of any significant nature?
Yes, sir. There are several aspects to that. There's the non-public information that we've spoken about earlier today, your location, your phone number, your email address, things that aren't advertised to the world. In fact, I believe 200 million, if we want to say regular users, not necessarily from a national security standpoint, Twitter in 2020 internally assessed that they lost information on 200 million users for email addresses, phone numbers, other information like that. This is the information that you need in order to start taking over other people's accounts. With your phone number and an email address, I can hijack your phone number. I can then change your Gmail, your Coinbase, your Ameritrade, your other accounts. I can cause financial harm that way. I can then assume your identity, but more importantly, I probably want to be able to understand your whereabouts, your network, and understand, well, I'll give you an example in foreign governments, a concern, and then we could apply that to the United States. There were requests for information about members in the farmers protest. There might be organizations or groups in the United States where, once I know your home address and your home phone number, I can approach you in real life. I can put pressure on you. I could possibly recruit you. You could be a witting or unwitting accomplice, and then I could influence you or target you for influence operations in the real world.
Let me just offer the thought that my home address, phone number, and email address are pretty widely known, and indeed in the public domain. So how does Twitter access to that information? Is there more, or what's the difference between being able to look me up in the phone book and having Twitter access to that information?
Having been in the public sector myself, yes, a lot of my information became known. There's also a lot of people who are in particular roles where that information is not known, and the targeting of them, perhaps staffers, perhaps aides, perhaps people around you, influencing to build that network, which we have seen within not Twitter, but which the U.S. and the intelligence communities have seen as part of the great game in the intelligence communities in the world.
Okay, so just play that out for me a little bit more, given that so much of this information is available through other channels. What would the end game be for, let's say, a foreign government seeking to put that kind of pressure on somebody who could presumably make a difference or a decision about to the benefit of the foreign country?
perhaps identifying a relative, a family member, a colleague who is in financial issues or has other elements that can be leveraged against them to help them influence you in a particular fashion without your awareness.
So you're able to, somebody would be able to create a sort of family or personal network around an individual Twitter user and extract information about folks in that network?
That is one particular aspect that intelligence communities are.
And how would that take place through the? If somebody's gotten into the Twitter system, how do they find that out?
Well, it might be used in combination with other data collection sources. For instance, one of the concerns of U.S. People traveling to other countries was there information in the OPM database? And can that information be cross-indexed against the healthcare industry databases that have been lost? Do we know that this person has a particular political bias on Twitter, and start to tie all of these things together for people of influence or access within governments or within sensitive positions?
Thanks very much. My time is up.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Graham. I'm sorry, Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Zatko, I want to explore just in the next 6 minutes the kind of data that is available on American citizens that can be used for appropriate or inappropriate purposes. You're familiar with the concept of ubiquitous technical surveillance, aren't you?
I can understand those words together and get the general context, I believe, sir. Yes.
Basically, all the cameras that are publicly posted, data on your smartphone, you've already talked about geolocation data, the type of transactions you engage in, where your home is, how much you paid for it. Even Google Earth may have taken a picture of your home or your place of business. So there's already huge volumes of data available for whatever purposes, even above and beyond what social media collects, correct?
Yes, sir. There's a lot of information about a lot of us in many different ways available through technology right now.
And I dare say, I bet most Americans just can't fathom the volume of data, and that's without even getting to things like social media. For example, in 2015, I think it was, there was a hack of the Office of Personnel Management records. I think it was 22 million records of government employees, including their applications for security clearances, was hacked reportedly by the People's Republic of China. And then if people decide that they want to figure out their family ancestry and use one of the DNA testing companies, my understanding is much of the testing is outsourced to places like China, where obviously it's not secure from Chinese government access. And so
the National Weather Service has issued a tropical storm warning. Tropical storm warning in effect. Hurricane warning is canceled. North winds of 25 to 35 knots with gusts up to 55 knots. Seas 8 to 13 feet.
This is all gone.
Extremely strong winds will cause hazardous seas, which will likely capsize or damage vessels and severely reduce visibility.
Still standing water.
Mariners should alter plans to avoid these hazardous conditions.
This was my grandma's house.
Seek safe harbor, alter course, and or secure vessel for severe conditions.
We set up all of this to get to higher ground, but obviously, thank God we didn't have to do that. So this is our back porch right now. I'm gonna come out here and show you the backyard. Somebody's RV came in our backyard. That's our pool. That's our deck. That was my house. My house is gone. So that's.
You don't even know where to begin. When you see so much devastation, how do you know where to start?
Imagine.
Yeah,
we're gonna be doing these stories for months in advance of what's happened.
You
down
got to figure
in
that whole street completely wiped out and beyond in that area.
So sad to see that. We do expect more damage like that again. A 2-day curfew is in effect throughout the Fort Myers area. They want to keep the roads clear for the emergency crews if they can even find the roads.
Right. Well, we expect to see more damage like this. We'll continue to watch. It's a 2-day curfew through Fort Myers as emergency crews work through there. They're just starting what is going to be a long process. Meanwhile, NOAA's hurricane hunters, they've been flying into Ian to gather data, but one flight was actually even dangerous for them.
Was haben wir bereits über 100.000 Menschen voraus, dass sie schlau waren und Swappy genutzt haben?
Look at this. Yeah, when they're concerned, you know it's bad. Nick Underwood saying the flight into Ian's eye was the worst he's ever been on. Said it felt like one strong lateral motion. You might have seen some of the lightning as well. Said he's never seen so much in a storm's eye before. These are the pictures he shared on Twitter, saying sometimes there was so much lightning it looked like daytime. It was actually the middle of the night.
Yeah, well, he was commenting that, usually the eye of the storm is calm. He said even in this eye, in Ian's eye, it was not calm. So that just gives you an idea of just how dangerous that storm is. Well, the storm moving over central Florida right now. It has been downgraded. It is now a tropical storm, and that does not lessen the effects of what we're seeing.
It does not. We're going to check in live with Fox Weather's Robert Ray. He is in Fort Myers this morning. Robert, good morning. Can only imagine what you've seen around you there in Fort Myers.
Yeah, guys, it's tough to look at this morning. This is the debris field in downtown Fort Myers, left over from when it flooded. Literally, it looked like a river here yesterday evening. These streets, there were white caps. The winds were pushing the water in from the bay and the river just 3 blocks. And now look what you have. You have garbage cans all over. You have people's belongings in the streets. You have mud. You have parts of palm trees. And the aftermath is just something to see, a sight to see here in the darkness before the